Chapter 1, One Last Breath. I freed my head of thoughts and let instincts take over. My lungs constricted. A puff of breath was released into the biting December air. All around me were spectators, chanting, roaring, and waving flags. My cleats stabbed into the grass, the football rolling in front of me. A French defender launched into a slide, the studs under his boots ready to claim the ball, or break my ankles, whichever allowed his team to win. And while it had probably cost him only a red card, it would no doubt end my career. I breathed in, jumped over his feet, bringing the ball with me, and breathed out. The crowd burst into a deafening cheer, like a yellow-blue wave that called out my name, glorifying its 8 letters into the high sky. Campinho, Campinho, Campinho. Behind me, players hastened to catch up, both from my and the opposite team. Except that my speed and momentum had created a chasm between us. The hot rush of adrenaline pumped me with power. Only 2 left. 3, including the goalkeeper. I was confident. I had done this before. Hours upon hours of drills, even late into the night, perfecting my touch, my craft. This was my life. Sweat, grass, and this ball. It defined my existence, my name. Knowing that it was a foolish endeavor to steal the ball from me in a 1v1, both defenders came at me like enraged bulls. They pressed me, pushing me to retreat or to pass it to someone else. But I was alone, and I certainly was not intimidated. So I did what I did best. I dribbled them. I feinted to the left, one of the defenders copying me to lock me in place, so I immediately took to the right. It was such a seamless and fast transition that it almost tripped him to the ground. The last defender couldn't wait anymore and made the mistake of closing in on me, entering my personal space, my domain. I nutmegged him, brushing past his shoulder to reclaim the ball that had rolled right between his open legs, and sprinted faster. I didn't need to glance at the giant clock of the stadium. I internally knew that there was not much time left. We were deep into the second half of the game. The score? 2-2. The French goalkeeper met me halfway in the penalty spot. His gaze was locked on me, like an eagle about to plunge and devour its prey. He was crouched, arms wide open. He suddenly plunged for the ball, hands stretched out. I tapped the ball, passing it to my left foot, and left the goalkeeper to taste the grass. The goalpost was empty. A beautiful sight. The sight of a goal. I stomped my left foot forward, and then loaded my right one. There was no need to overdo it. A gentle tap of the boot would see the ball socketed into the net. I looked down, only to find that I was still running? A pain lanced through my heart, and I couldn't catch the gasp that tumbled out of my lips. My knees couldn't hold me up anymore, and, all of a sudden, the perfect control I had over my feet failed me. It was not unusual to fall down when playing. Between tackles, constant body contact with defenders, and failed plays, done at a high speed, no less, it was hard even for me to stand my ground without tumbling down the ground like an uncoordinated fool. But this was different. The pain sharpened, seemingly cutting my soul. I heaved, my breath rattling, struggling to swallow the oxygen. The ball was next to my face, and even with the blinding floodlights that bathed the stadium, I could vividly make out every detail of this monochrome leather sphere. The chanting faded, and chaos seemed to have broken out. What was going on? The goalkeeper came running at me. Fuck. I have to score. Brazil was so close to lifting the World Cup trophy for the 6th time. Contrary to my expectations, the French goalie didn't claim the ball to resume the game. He fell on his knees next to me, mumbling something in a mix of broken English and French. There was concern in his voice, that much I could tell. I couldn't even see his face, the floodlights behind him eclipsed his visage, like the moon in front of the sun. The twinges continued unbidden, sending burning, throbbing bullets of pure agony through my heart. I thrashed, curling up, hands clutching at my chest, as if to seize the pain in my palms. I looked up, sweat pouring down my eyes. I was surrounded by a wall of yellow and blue. A French striker touched my shoulder, not knowing what to do. He tried to lift me up, while one of my teammates pried my mouth open, reaching for the tongue or any other obstruction that prevented me from breathing correctly. A vain attempt. The problem lay elsewhere. A voice spoke over the others, calling for a medical team. Then the referee got involved, and the noise from the crowd only got louder and louder. I couldn't see their faces. I couldn't hear their voices. With each beat, my heart contracted, the pause between them lengthening. 1 beat. 2 beats. I was shaken left and right, lifted up, and then carefully placed on a stretcher. 3 beats. My arm fell over the edge of the stretcher, fingers grazing the grass as I was carried inside an ambulance van. Darkness crept into the corners of my vision. The gradual loss of it was frightening. It was not a sudden plunge into the darkness, instead, it was as if I was being eased inside it. The pain faded, ringing in my nerves like a distant echo. All that was left was an odd sense of fear and comfort, a dichotomy that lulled me into a deep sleep. My heart struggled to pump one more beat, one more second of being alive. And then nothing. "Kids, breakfast is ready. Come down." I woke up with a gasp, a lingering ache in my chest, and a hammering pain in my head. The combination made something churn in my stomach. Bile rose up, burning its way through my throat. I doubled over the side of my bed and let it all out. A fit of coughs came next, the throbbing in my skull abating to tolerable levels. I stared at my hands, my breathing still labored. I couldn't understand. Did I score? Did we win? I blinked, dazed. I curled my fingers, turning my hands around, probing them. They didn't belong to me. Not the right elasticity. Not the right skin tone. They were smaller, the veins less prominent. Where was I? A room, I noticed. Half of it was enshrouded in darkness, the other half bright with sunlight. Problem was, it was not my room. I lived in a penthouse, not this 4x6 bedroom. My linen, expensive white sheets were replaced with this green abomination underneath me. "You better get down here or the food will be gone." A loud voice wafted from downstairs, penetrating through thick layers of concrete yet still retaining that womanly husk. That was another problem. Whoever she was speaking Korean. But that was not the point. The point was that I could understand it. I had played a couple of friendly matches against their national team, and thus picked up a few words here and there. Just enough to impress people, not this baffling degree of proficiency. Alarm bells rang out in my head. I immediately shuffled out of bed, bare feet bringing me to the body-sized mirror next to it. I was so weak. Fear seized my throat, and the moment I was within the reflection of the glass, my eyes tore wide open. Who was that? Certainly not me. I brought a hand up, and watched as my reflection did the same. I touched my face. It was delicate and smooth. The face of a boy, not a man. A mop of messy dark hair nearly fell over my eyes. I couldn't understand at all. What the fuck was going on? And then a sharp pain went off, the veins on my temple bulging and throbbing under the hot waves. Memories that weren't mine flooded my head. The grayed-out recollection of past events flashed before my eyes in a broken sequence. I was somewhere, crying, people clothed in black all around me, offering their heartfelt prayers to the departed. My parents. Smoke wafted from the candles. I cried harder. They were dead. Another memory jumped up. "Cool me." A hand was on my shoulder, squeezing it encouragingly. "Say hi to everyone." 3 women, of perfect proportions, each of them the epitome of Asian beauty, stood in front of my younger, bedazzled self. A mature woman, donning a burgundy dress that hugged her voluptuous body, came forward, hands clasped together. There was a beautiful smile on her face. I fell on my knees, hands on the cold floor. "Who is Dae Ho?" Then, a voice buried deep within the reaches of my consciousness replied. "It's me. Dae Ho. But I'm also Jair Campinho. Not anymore." I could vaguely recall Dae Ho's 20 years' worth of memories. From infancy to maturity. The emotions associated with those memories were diluted. My parents were dead. A car crash had done them in. Orphaned at 13, I had the fortune of being taken in by my father's friend. It was a tragic circumstance that Dae Ho lived with. And behind that cheerful smile, a shadow of sadness haunted him. "Dae Ho," I whispered. "You're not me, but I'm you. I died. That's what happened." Now, I understood. It was discomforting to think about, even more so when I was still alive. The fresh breeze of the pitch. The roar of the spectators. The adrenaline of scoring a goal. The exhilaration of hearing your name sung by thousands of viewers. And right at the most important moment, in the most important tournament, in the last minutes of the final match, I died. A sprint that started in the middle of the field, dribbling my way through a wall of defenders, goalkeeper included, ended with my collapse in front of the empty goalpost. I chuckled. What a joke. The memory was so vivid, the phantom pains even followed me in this new life. I was an invader in this world, in this body. Dae Ho, what happened to him? Did he die because of me? Such an innocent young boy, burdened with tragedy, couldn't even find a sliver of happiness. Slowly, I clambered back to my feet. With Dae Ho's knowledge of the house, I was quick to find everything that I needed. The bathroom to wash up and a change of clothes. I was only wearing a set of embarrassing, tight underwear. This kid had no style. Then again, he was not rich like I used to be. As I was contemplating my future in this country, I stumbled upon someone in the hallway. Question mark. I remembered her. In my memories, she had black hair. Now she was sporting a diluted blonde dye. She was not beautiful. She was breathtaking. I had met my fair share of gorgeous babes in the past, but it was as if this young woman here was drawn by the hand of a god. She was tall, but not too much. It was the perfect standard. She had an hourglass figure that was most likely the byproduct of genes, a diet, and rigorous exercise. The clothes she wore were tight, revealing a strip of the fair-skinned flesh of her belly. The fabric was particularly strained on her chest and hips. She stared at me, toothbrush in her mouth. A name popped up in my mouth. Cha Mia, the eldest daughter of the family that adopted me. I greeted her with a nod. Good morning? Mia Noona. She quirked one eyebrow up and pulled the toothbrush out. Good morning. Her luscious, glossy lips curved into a beautiful arch. I didn't know how to act around her. Dae Ho's personality didn't affect mine, and I had no intention of charading myself as a dumb, inexperienced boy. Cha Mia didn't take her eyes off me as I made my way downstairs. Chapter 2, Dilemma. The stark difference between a trained body and this one was as clear as the morning sky. Dae Ho had never done a push-up in his life. My limbs felt like limp noodles. Ridiculous. That was something I had to absolutely change. Cha Mia's footfalls rang out behind me. She didn't say a single word. So I quietly made my way into the kitchen. I had to evaluate the situation first, so I decided not to be particularly talkative, even though this body's old personality was the embodiment of a chatterbox. Good morning, I said, glancing at my aunt, who was bent over, doing something. Her wide, bubbly butt stood out in that staying-home dress she was wearing. God, I could even see the shadow of her panties. Ignore it. Ignore it. I heaved a deep sigh, swallowed back the flaring hormones, and sat at the table, next to my uncle. His name was Cha Yong-gu, the one who welcomed me into his family with open arms. He looked like he might have been handsome in his heyday, but a luxurious and sedentary lifestyle made his cheeks chubby, and his belly protrude out. He nodded at me behind his newspaper. This body's gratitude towards him resonated with me. Cha Yong-gu was the reason I had a warm home to live in, and the love of a family. I nodded back at him, a smile tugging at the corners of my lip. Come, sit down. That same sexy voice that I woke up to rang out next to me. Eat up. It was not as loud as before, since she didn't have a reason to yell at the moment. Now it was soft, mellow, like honey. I turned around and looked at her. Now, that was the kind of face that could make any man do stupid things. Delicate like porcelain. Her willowy eyebrows fluttered above purple eyes. Purple. Not a blue shade that made it look purple. Her full, crimson lips were curled into a smile. Her hair was tied into a bun, with caramel-brown tresses messily sticking out of that beautiful crown. It was the look of a mature woman who had no makeup on, who didn't spend time that morning primping herself up, yet she was simply otherworldly. Yonggeuna. It was my aunt, or as Dae Ho would mentally address her as, my lovely aunt. Why did I never see a beauty like her before? Jang Eun-ha walked up to the table with a container in her hands. Mom, let me help you. Cha Mia offered, and from my seat, I had an ample view of my stepsister's backside. If this goes on, I won't survive a day here. Aunt Eun-ha smiled and waved her off with a, it's fine. Her eyes roved around the table. Has Sua not come down? And then she looked at me. Dae Ho, go wake up that sleepyhead. I didn't want to do it. My admittedly limited experience with this new family so far told me that I was signing up to see an unhealthy amount of skin from Sua. Still, I nodded and got up. Okay. With barely a glance in Andy's direction, I started to make my way upstairs. Dae Ho, are you okay? Eun-ha asked, a concerned frown pulling at her exquisite face. You look so serious. What are you talking about, Auntie? I chuckled, somehow dragging a smile to my lips. It was a fake one, it could be seen from how much it was twitching, eager to go back down. I'm fine. Eun-ha looked like she was about to say something, but I beat her to it. I'm going to wake Sua up. And then I vanished in the shadow of the stairs. Eun-ha and Mia traded a concerned look. I already predicted that, at some point, Eun-ha would force an answer out of me. No, actually, Mia would probably approach me first. I stopped in my tracks, recalled the original Dae Ho's bright personality and smile, and tried to mimic it. My lips went up a bit, teeth clenched. It was not like I didn't know how to smile, it was just that Dae Ho's smile was very unique and recognizable. The naivety and innocence of a child who saw the world through rose-tinted glasses. It couldn't be replicated with such a half-hearted attempt. I wasn't even interested in becoming him. I knew who I was. I was just wearing a different face, under a different name. Forget it. I stood in front of Sua's door. I curled my fingers, and tapped the knuckles against the wood. I waited 20 seconds for a reply, or a sound, which didn't come. So I knocked again, a bit harder, but not too much. I didn't want to be obnoxious. 20 seconds later, and I still didn't get an answer. Great. Now, what do I do? I didn't want to barge in without being acknowledged to do so. Sua was an introvert that liked her privacy, and was absolutely territorial of her space. Nevertheless, something may have happened, or perhaps she was just sound asleep. I twisted the doorknob and pushed the door open, watching as the gap widened until I saw Suo's back. She was hugging a pillow, knees curled up. As a result, her tight, white shorts were stretched to their limit. They encased those perfect mounds in a way that drew the eye to the crack of her butt. She had long legs, just like her sister. Slender, creamy white, and definitely commercial material for pantyhose. I knocked the wooden frame next to me one more time, to alert her of my presence. Suo Nuna, wake up, breakfast is ready. Everyone is waiting for you. I don't want to eat, she said, curtly. Are you sure? It's not healthy to skip breakfast. I said I don't want to eat. Suo repeated, this time with a heavy tone of finality. She didn't even bother to turn around. And, you can't just barge into my room like that. I'm sorry, it won't happen again. As expected, she didn't take it well. I'll ask Auntie to leave a plate for you in case you change your mind. Sleep well. And then I closed the door. Dae Ho's memories of Suo were mixed. She was difficult to talk to, always cooped up inside her room either reading or writing. I walked back down with a thoughtful frown. Auntie, Suo Nuna said she doesn't want to eat. Doesn't want to eat? A flustered expression enthroned Eunha's face. Perhaps she's feeling unwell. I amended with a sigh. Who was I to psychoanalyze the mind of a young woman anyway? She cupped her chin, eyes aglow with concern. I'm quite worried. She should really eat more. It's fine. She's smart. She can take care of herself. Cha Yonggu spoke up, chopsticks clamped around the neck of a fish. Let's eat, everyone. The man of the house announced, and, naturally, everyone listened. I reclaimed my spot, Mia parking her but right next to me. She tucked a lock of hair behind her ear before she started eating. Her table manners were flawless, as was Auntie Eunha's. My uncle was a bit more voracious, but he respected the proper etiquette, in his own way. Uncle, Cha Yonggu raised one eyebrow at me. It was so awkward speaking to him, knowing that for all intents and purposes, he was a stranger to me, memories notwithstanding. Can I get a pull-up bar? And a set of weights if it's not too much trouble. The worst I expected was a flat-out refusal. I was not his son. And even though we were quite well off, he might not be willing to spend his money on me. Naturally, my memories told me otherwise, but that was Dae Ho's perception of him. I wanted to form my own opinion about this man. Everyone stopped eating. I looked around, drinking in their rather exaggerated reactions. Auntie Eunha had a curious expression on her face, while Mia had a playful smile. She hit my shoulder. Well, who are you trying to impress? No one. I returned with a question. The genuineness of my tone threw her off. Oh, really? She continued to stare at me, eyes narrowed with an air of suspicion. I just want to change. Was that the correct way to ease them into this new Dae Ho that I had become? Uncle Yonggu wore a look of pleasant surprise. That would be no problem, son. A man should strive to become the best version of himself. Our little Dae Ho is growing. Eunha sighed, a hint of fondness in her eyes. I bet he's going to give up within 3 days. Mia said, chopsticks still tucked between her lips. I smirked at that response. I decided to take that as a challenge to prove her wrong. Dae Ho may have quit soon, but I had been through that routine before. Football practice was truly grueling, and I had learned to be disciplined enough to follow through with whatever training I had to do. Dae Ho. I regretted accepting that call. Have you ever seen a girl's underwear? A nasal, lecherous laugh followed those words. Han Go Bong. Dae Ho's friend. Better yet, my friend. This guy was my age, but he looked older than my uncle. Now, there were 2 roads that I could take here. I either told him the truth, that I had indeed seen a woman's underwear before, or lie. With the first option, there was a 10% chance that he'd shut up, a 30% chance that he wouldn't believe me, and a 60% chance that he'd ask even more weird questions. The second option would allow him to find a common ground with me, and thus start a whole diatribe about girls' underwear. Yes, I did. I said simply, without elaborating. Steam came out of Gobong's nose. Didn't you say you have sisters? Did you see their underwear? Ah, of course he would tread into that topic. No, I haven't. Technically yes, but he didn't need to know that. Hee hee. Gobong laughed, and for some reason, that gave me the creeps. Let me show you something amazing. And, without waiting for my consent, he stuffed a hand into his pocket and pulled out, panties. Stained panties. Tada. Gobong, why? What the? This. He laughed, blushing. This is my sister's underwear. Why the hell did you steal it? There was something wrong with this kid's head, and with Dae Ho's head too, for associating with him. You're probably not surprised since you've already seen panties, but... He scratched his cheek. I took it for you. No, I don't want it. Go Bong insisted, even going as far as to push them into my hands. It's fine. This is my gift to you. Take it, he said, smiling with eyes closed. Because you have always been nice to me. I was wrong. This kid is just lonely. I heaved a deep sigh and stuffed the panties back into his hands. Go Bong looked at me as if I had betrayed him. I stood up, and with a confident smile, I said, "Hey, do you want to see something truly amazing? Your sister's panties?" He guessed eagerly. No. I mentally facepalmed as I jogged to a bush and retrieved an abandoned ball. Specifically, a volleyball. The weight was not what I was used to, but it was an acceptable alternative. A ball? I didn't like the disappointment in his voice. Look carefully, I said, and with a gentle kick, the ball soared up. I waited until it fell on my head, where I expertly balanced it. Amazing, right? I chuckled, rolling the ball down to the back of my neck. I spread my arms open, and even went as far as going down on the ground to do push-ups. Whoa! I stood back up, letting the ball slide over my shoulder and back on my right foot. And then I blew Go Bong's mind with some bona fide Brazilian freestyle. Chapter 3, Changes. Sleep didn't bless me that night. There was too much in my head. Whenever I closed my eyes, I'd find myself on the pitch, a ball tucked under my foot, and opponents flanking me from all sides. All of my accomplishments, accolades, my fame, and wealth depended on how good I was with my feet. And in the span of 90 minutes, I lost it all. A career-ending injury would have been way better than this, than losing my identity. I would never see them again. My family, my friends, my teammates. Familiar faces flashed through my head. A faint ache spread from my chest. I placed a hand on it, and I swear I could still relive my death with each beat of my heart. The pain had faded, still was actually, but its lingering shadow would always remain there. What a ridiculous situation. I tried to Google up my name earlier. Jair Campinho. There was no news of my death. There was no news of anything pertaining to my existence. Even my teammates didn't exist here. Worse of all, it was not only them that didn't exist, but also every professional player I've faced in my career. They've never been born. Not yet, at least. Actually, that was wrong. I was not in the past, the modernity of this home could testify to that. And even if I was, hypothetically speaking, decades into the past, there was no way that big names like Ronaldo and Zidane wouldn't pop up. Which meant that this was either a dream, highly unlikely, or a parallel dimension, a mirror reality, or, in the worst case, this was all a figment of my imagination and I was actually bound to chair in some psychiatric ward. Fuck. I couldn't sit still, because if I did, I'd be stewing in my own loneliness and the madness of it all. I could handle most problems with a level head, but they had to be logical in nature. How was I supposed to deal with this? I rolled out of bed, straightened my legs, bent my elbows, and started doing push-ups. 1, 2, 3, 4. My chin slammed onto the cold, hard floor. I severely underestimated how weak this body was. The original Dae Ho wouldn't know the meaning of the word exercise if it slammed into his face with a sledgehammer. I picked myself up and resumed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then down on the ground. Well, improvement. Surprisingly, this body made up for its lack of strength with its sheer endless stamina. I felt like I could go on for the entire night. Yes, my arms were sore, but I didn't feel that post-exercise lethargy that'd make me want to lie down and rest. Truly interesting. Star operator. Zhong A nas beobebasha. Come quickly, honey. Yanggu laughed with a silly smile on his face. His gold-rimmed glasses reflected off the dim light of the room, purposefully lowered to a romantic hue, perfect for a night of activities. Despite Eunha's best efforts, she couldn't help but recall Dae Ho's recent behavior. There was never a time when his smile didn't light up a room. A kind smile that hid no daggers. There was no corruption within that boy's soul. Even when he was sad, or simply upset, it was easy to pick up on it. A pout was usually the first indicator. And when he was really depressed, he'd ball his hands into fists and hold back the tears. That would happen on the nights he dreamt of his parents. A hug was the best medicine, as she had done many times in the past to calm him down. He wore his emotions on his sleeves. And everyone liked him for it. He was adorably naive and honest to a fault. He was, like a child that would never grow up, forever stuck in that baby phase. Today, she had seen for herself the signs of him growing up. Dae Ho was taciturn, his behavior guarded, as if he had met them for the first time. Perhaps it could be attributed to something else, she didn't want to jump to conclusions. However, there was no doubt that something had indeed changed. Come on, where are you going? I'm going to check up on Dae Ho. He's been weird today. I'm afraid something's up. she said weakly, averting her eyes when she saw her husband's junk standing in attention. He's a grown boy. He's fine. She scratched her cheek. I just want to be sure he's fine, haha, I'll be right back, okay? Yang-gu was left speechless as he watched Eun-ha click the door shut with an apologetic, flustered smile. She heaved a deep sigh, hand on her chest. A downtrodden look developed across her face. Yang-gu could be quite stubborn, which was understandable given that he had to set off for a business trip on the morrow. She used to love him, once. When she didn't know how much better she could have. When she didn't know he had cheated on her on one of those business trips. Ironic, how a perfect-looking family like hers could have such a stain behind a polished layer of lies. Eun-ha brushed a strand of brown hair off her eyes and, quietly, on the tip of her toes, started to make her way up. Her long, bare legs covered a lot of distance between one step and another. As she passed Suo's room, she briefly overheard the furious tapping of fingers on a keyboard. That kid is staying up late again. She shook her head in exasperation. Mia's room, by comparison, didn't let out a single noise. She had half a mind to check up on her as well, but it was not urgent. And then, Dae Ho's room came into view. A veneer of darkness shrouded half of the door, while the other was dimly kissed by the pouring moonlight. Eun-ha gently tapped the wooden surface with her finger. She realized it might have not been loud enough to be heard, but at the same time she didn't want to wake him up, were he to be sleeping. Naturally, no response made its way back to her. So she decided to try again, but a bit harder. This time, the knock echoed off on the other side, and she had no doubt that Dae Ho, should he be still up, would have heard it. She waited patiently for the sound of his footsteps to draw closer. But none came. She tapped her chin, and while it was not her right to do so, she stuck her left ear to the door, hoping to pick up on any noise. Contrary to her expectations, she did. It was faint, but she heard it all the same. The low-pitched sound of breath coming in and out, fast and rough. Eun-ha's eyes widened, and she pasted herself to the door, to hear better, to draw a more complete picture in her head. Is he? She strained her ears. The panting grew a tad louder. And now she could also vaguely make out the grunts of effort mixed in. Dae Ho is a young boy, it's normal for him to masturbate. That was her conclusion. What other reason was there for a healthy young man, deep into the night, with his door closed, to make such noises? Still, is he doing it correctly? Dae Ho lost his parents at a very young age. There must have been no one to teach him certain things. She had talked about it with Yang-gu a few years back, but her husband waved it off and said that he'd learn everything on his own. She agreed with him, back then. Surely, between the internet and his classmates, he had to know, at least, something about sex. Except that his innocence built a wall around those topics. And, predictably, that made Eun-ha concerned. What if he doesn't know? What if he'll never learn? She calmed down the beating of her heart, inhaled deeply, and opened the door. A click rang out. The door creaked, and Eun-ha jutted her head through the gradually increasing gap. Her eyes immediately fell on the bare form of her adopted son. He was covered in sweat, a puddle forming right under his chin. His jaw was stiff, his lips set into a determined frown, and his eyes were fixed on the floor, a sharp glint within them. His elbows bent, until his heaving chest was almost in contact with the floor, and then he straightened them. The whole thing was so slow that Eun-ha could see how his arms trembled under the stress. He's doing push-ups? She felt so silly for letting her thoughts wander in that inappropriate direction. What am I even thinking? Could it be even considered a coincidence, when that very morning, he had expressed his desire to work out? Eun-ha was snapped out of her reverie when Dae Ho, who didn't seem to have noticed her, suddenly turned his head, and that intense, determined gaze almost stole her breath away. Gone was the innocence, those were the eyes of a man. His elbows uncurled as he struggled to climb back to his feet. Auntie? Such an adorable way of addressing her, and it was perverted by the calmness and almost cold detachment in which it came out. He drew a bit closer to her, but not too much, likely mindful of the smell of sweat clinging to his body. He was still panting, but it was more controlled now. Eun-ha stared at him, at the way a line of sweat traced a salty path down his chest. She gulped, reminded of what she hadn't done downstairs, with her husband. Ditto, she started, stuttering a bit. Seriously, what's wrong with me today? She heaved a deep sigh and steeled her gaze. Can we talk for a bit? He blinked, tilted his head, and continued staring at her. Eun-ha could almost see the questions running through his mind. He nodded. Is there a problem? It's quite late? Well, she found herself quite lost on how to breach the subject. Lately, we haven't had many opportunities to talk like this. Dae Ho dug around his memories for a bit. Indeed, we have not. And then he smiled. Eun-ha didn't like how fake it looked. There was a hint of emotion there, but it was all hidden behind a curtain of doubt. Are you okay? You seem distracted. Unha bit her bottom lip. I'm fine. He narrowed his eyes, catching on the lie like a shark would on blood. Still, he didn't say anything, and allowed her enough time to gather her bearings. But, are you? She said, eventually. You know, if there's something that's troubling you, I hope that I've done a good enough job as your adopted mother that you'd come to me. It's weird to see you like this, Dae Ho. See me like what? See you, so, indifferent. Dae Ho's eyes drooped down a bit, and Unha could have sworn she caught a glimpse of the innocent boy he still was behind that cold facade. I just had a lot on my mind. I didn't mean to hurt you. His tone was warm, and his eyes conveyed a heartfelt apology. It's fine. She averted her gaze, hand massaging her forehead. Just, don't avoid us. We're here for you, and always will be. Dae Ho took a few steps forward, towering over her. He used to slouch, but now his back was straight, and his true height was fully revealed. Right back at you, he said, bopping her nose playfully. If you ever need someone to talk to, I'll be more than happy to be the shoulder you can cry on. I know that me and Nuna and Su Nuna care deeply for you, but they probably don't understand how hard it is to be in your shoes. Right? Unha was taken aback. You should go to sleep, Auntie. You look tired. And then he retreated, grabbed a towel, and headed for the bathroom to rinse the sweat and dirt off his body. When Unha made her way back down, it was to the sight of her husband snoring away. He was still naked, probably in the hopes that he'd be awake long enough to see her return. She tucked herself in, next to him, and stared at the ceiling. Her earlier conversation with Dae Ho was odd. It was not only his behavior that changed, it was everything, really. The way he spoke. The way he elaborated information. The way he looked at her. He was no more the easily flustered boy. There was a sharpness to his eyes that was not aimed at her, but at the world in general. There was a lot of confusion as well, but whatever he was dealing with, he was taking it in stride. Unha couldn't, for the love of God, understand what made him change so much. And she also didn't know why she was so pleased to find such an interesting, and, dare she say so, charming young man in his stead. Changes could be scary, but this one might prove to be a blessing. Chapter 4, The Talk. This body doesn't make sense. I thought I'd wake up feeling like a blob of jelly after all that intense workout, but it turned out that Dae Ho's anatomy was simply something science couldn't explain. Besides a negligible ache in my chest muscles, I was full of energy. Way too much of it, actually. A persistent tingling on my crotch reminded me that the healthy body of a man at the peak of his youth was quite vigorous in that field as well. I was the same in my previous body, though it was sadly losing steam as I aged. Problem was, a teeny-weeny bit of pre-cum might have slicked my underwear. I can't believe this. I didn't even dream of anything. I decided to shelf that particular oddity away for later and hurry to the bathroom before my stepsisters beat me to it. Fortunately, I had woken up a little earlier than usual, which meant I could take my sweet time. Just as I was about to open the bathroom door, it opened by itself, Yanggu coming out with a towel around his neck. "Uncle, good morning." I greeted him with a practiced smile. "HN, good morning, boy," he said stoically, steam billowing in his wake. His eyes avoided mine for some reason. There was a grim sadness that clung to him. It was a bit awkward, because I couldn't understand why he was feeling so down. Our impromptu conversation seemed to end there as he walked past me, his bare feet thumping against the floor. Then he stopped, turned his head around, and smiled. "By the way, I ordered what you requested yesterday. Premium shipping too. It should arrive today, so watch out." My smile widened, gaining a touch of honesty. "Thank you, Uncle. Really." He waved me off with a laugh and proceeded to make his way downstairs. I stared at his back, until it disappeared around the top navel of the stairs. Whatever is going on with him, it's not my business. I headed for the now-free bathroom and washed up. After I changed into a fresh set of clothes, I traipsed down, hair still a bit wet. The weather was hot enough that it would dry up on its own. Auntie Unha was already up and about, smiling to herself as she held onto a tomato, reverently, as if it were harvested from God's own backyard. She didn't notice me, so I decided to be a bit playful. I tiptoed up to her, and leaned my lips right next to her ear. The faint scent of roses lingered on my nose. "Good morning." Unha nearly jumped out of her skin. The sudden scare prompted the tomato in her hand to fly up like a cannonball. She immediately wheeled around, hand on her heaving chest as she glared at me, a pout hanging on her lips. "Sheesh, Dae Ho, don't do that to your auntie." I tracked the soaring tomato with my eyes, calculated where it would fall, extended my hand, palm up, and grabbed it right before it could hit Unha in her pretty little head. Vegetables can be scary. My poor attempt at humor seemed to have been a success as Unha's frown turned into a smile. I handed the tomato back to her. "It smells good." "It does, right?" Unha couldn't help but gush with a bright smile. I'm so glad I went to the market. It's so fresh. My lips moved before I could stop them. I was not talking about the tomato. Okay, I'll just treat it as some harmless flirt. This woman is married, for fuck's sake. Unha blinked, puzzled at first, then the realization dawned on her. She quickly averted her gaze, fingering the tomato with a blush across her cheeks. Things were getting a little dicey. A change of topics was in order. Where is Uncle Yang-gu? Unha slowly recovered from the impact of my words. Oh, he's on a business trip. He'll be gone for a few days. At those words, her eyes drooped a bit. I sensed an edge in her tone, and a hint of resignation. Is everything all right? I asked as I sat down on my spot at the table. My offer from yesterday still stands, you know? She stopped knifing the tomato, turned around, and didn't shy away from making eye contact with me. The smile that she gifted me, however, was obviously fake, a forced attempt to quell my concerns. Everything's all right? Unha chirped, smile wavering but not going down. Now, what am I supposed to do when she's like that? I didn't want to poke my nose into her affairs. Offering my help was the best I could do at the moment. Being too pushy would only drive a wedge between us. You know, if there's something that's troubling you, I hope I've done a good enough job as your adopted son that you'd come to me. I said, repeating what she told me yesterday right back at her. Her cheeks puffed a bit as she sent me a "that's not fair" look. I laughed, but kept silent. She did the same. Cha Mia Cat walked her way down not too long after, each step rehearsed to resemble a celebrity's stride across a sea of flashing lights. She was dressed in a sleeveless crop tank, revealing most of her creamy white tummy. It also drew emphasis on her ample bosom, which was currently putting a dangerous strain on the fabric of her top. Her hot pants weren't exactly a modest choice either. It clung to her plump rear, exposing long, slender legs. It was mesmerizing, honestly, how beautiful the women in this house were. A mischievous glint flashed in those feline eyes of hers. Mia skulked quietly behind her mother, bringing a finger to her lips and gesturing to me to keep quiet. I nodded with an amused smile, and watched as she lifted one hand up, and brought the wrath of a demon down on Auntie Unha's unprotected butt. Mom. The crisp, satisfying sound of a pair of naughty cheeks being castigated pierced my soul. Good morning. HNN. Unha gasped, reflexively covering her burning red cheeks. She stared at Mia with tears in the corner of her eyes. And Mia, what's for breakfast? Mia said cheekily, ignoring the pout growing on her mother's face. You shouldn't hit your mother like that. Unha reprimanded weakly as she rubbed her sore butt. Mia laughed, chopsticks already between her fingers. Haha. It looked so firm, I couldn't help it. She stared at Unha with a smirk. I mean, how can someone your age still look so hot? Stop it. Am I right, Dae Ho? Mia winked at me. I chuckled, playing along. Oh, don't worry. You'll look hot at that age too. Oh, she tilted her head, blonde hair falling on one side. She looked at me with interest. Mom, what am I supposed to do? Dae Ho thinks I'm hot. I rolled my eyes. Now, stop fooling around and eat up. Unha announced with her authority as a mother. As we feasted on the delicacies Unha made, I couldn't help but notice that Suwa didn't come down that morning either. Then again, it was such a regular thing that no one said anything. Breakfast went on uneventfully. Unha busied herself washing the dishes, while Mia slapped my shoulder and headed back to her room. A faint scent of lilies trailed after her swishing hair. Later that morning, right before lunch, the courier came to deliver a couple of packages for Cha Yang-gu. And since he wasn't there, I was free to take it in his place. I remembered what he told me earlier in the day, and looking at the length of the cardboard box, it must have been the pull-up bar he promised me. The weight of the other box was also a good indicator as to what it was. I brought them back to my room and unboxed them. The pull-up bar was not a cheap one, which I was thankful for. The problem was that it had to be assembled and nailed to the wall. It was not difficult, and after borrowing Yang-gu's tools, I got everything done in an hour. The weights were a set of 10 kilograms, perfect to start with. Actually, probably not with this body, but I was confident that I would get there soon enough. And since I was still so full of energy, I decided to get started right away. Star operator. Zhong nas beobebasha. Unha was facing yet another dilemma, though this one seemed to be recurring in nature. A laundry basket was secured tightly against her chest with one hand, while with the other she held a particular piece of underwear. Dae Ho. She whispered to herself, bringing the white garment closer to her face, until her nose was stuffed into the damp fabric. She took a deep whiff, mentally digesting what she was smelling and categorizing the substance as something very familiar. A faint blush dusted her cheeks. Did he have another wet dream? It seems he's having them more and more frequently. With a sigh, Unha stuffed all of the dirty clothes inside the washing machine. He must not know how to masturbate. She pressed the power button on the panel control, and the clothes started whirling. Yesterday, she was supposed to have a simple chat with him, but now it looked like he needed the talk. Yanggu was not interested, so the responsibility fell on her. Naturally, she could wash her hands of it. Recently, he sounded and looked mature enough that he probably didn't need her counsel. He even flirted with her. Maybe it was not meant to come off as such, but that was how she interpreted it. What about that friend of his, Go Bong? But then she remembered how clueless that kid was. Chances were that he knew even less than Dae Ho, and that was highly concerning, especially at their age. Should I teach him? Unha stood in front of Dae Ho's door. The beat of her heart echoed off in her ears. It was deep into the night, yet again. It was the only time when her sneaking off wouldn't be noticed. She held a tray of thinly cut slices of apple. A good and healthy sneak, and hopefully it could keep their mouths occupied enough for her to find a way to break the ice. There's no need to go far? I'll just... The door, which was slightly ajar, was suddenly pulled open. Unha's breath hitched in her throat. So it was you. Dae Ho stood on the threshold, the shadow of a smirk playing on his lips. Came to talk? She was a bit thrown off, but still managed a nod. Yes, actually. He scooted a bit to the side, making enough space for her to slip inside. Unha idly noticed how tidy his room was. His pull-up bar was fixed on the wall, next to the window, while his weights were neatly organized in a corner, where it wouldn't bother anyone walking around. She placed the tray in her hands on a low table. You look flustered. Dae Ho pointed out, his sharp eyes never failing to strike at her weaknesses. Unha smiled disarmingly, hoping to diffuse the situation a bit. Well. She scratched her cheek, sitting down on his bed. She patted the spot next to her. Come, sit. He shrugged and did as he was told. A stretch of awkward silence followed. It was understandable given the topic she wanted to talk about. I'm surprised you're still awake. Good. That was a decent conversation starter. He leaned on his elbows as he stared ahead. Just been thinking. You've been doing a lot of thinking lately. I'm growing up. Lots of stuff to think about. Like what? Unha was genuinely curious. Dae Ho finally turned his head to look at her. Secret. He said conspiratorially, finger on his lips in a shushing motion. She smiled a bit at that. What about you? He returned the question. A lot is going through your mind right now, isn't it? She blushed a bit. Actually, what I'm about to ask you is a bit weird, but please, bear with me. Dae Ho blinked, puzzled. Go on. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, eyes anywhere but on him. Have you ever masturbated before? Chapter 5, The First Class. Of all the questions I might have expected, such a curveball was definitely out of my predictions. Then again, this was part of her charm. Still, it didn't make it any less mortifying. I blame the old Dae Ho. That idiot had never masturbated before. He didn't even know what it meant. His general knowledge was so lacking that until recent years, he thought women had dicks too, and that storks delivered babies. And I had to live with those memories. Dae Ho? Unha's soft call brought me back to reality. There was a knowing glint in her eyes. Yes, I have. There was no way I was going to subject myself to more embarrassment because of that pea-brained fool. Sure, it was not exactly the truth, for I had yet to do that with this body, but it was not a lie either, since I had indeed experienced the act of masturbation. But we were not there to discuss such an apocryphal concept. Really? Unha pressed, leaning closer to me. I nodded, mustering as much honesty as I could into one word. Yes. I don't believe you. She bit her bottom lip. What? Oh, come on. There is no need to be embarrassed, Dae Ho. A sigh slipped out. There was no one around to teach you, after all. Her statement was legit. I couldn't recall a single instance where the original Dae Ho was ever explained what sex was, or why his body reacted in a certain way. Fuck, why do I have to deal with this? Auntie, I appreciate the sentiment, but your concerns are unfounded. I've been on the internet before, you know? Unha's blush deepened as she fidgeted. Then, prove it. She challenged, tone soft, almost a whisper. I couldn't believe it, and she looked like she couldn't believe she said such a thing either. I'm sorry, but, do you want me to? Oh, great, I was stuttering too. You can't be serious. Unha pressed her lips into a thin line as she fingered a lock of hair, curling and playing with it. Then she scooted a little closer to me. I just want to make sure you're doing it properly. Properly? Was there even a way to do it wrong? It was instinctive, after all, not something you had to study for. Then again, I should stop regarding this world with normal standards. The original Dae Ho was a prime example of that. If you do it right, I promise I won't bring it up ever again. Unha amended, now looking deep into my eyes. I didn't say anything. She continued staring at me, though I could see how her eyes were wavering. I got up, and quietly made my way to the door. Dae Ho, wait. I locked the door. That shut her up. All right. Let's do it. Unha gulped, heart thrumming in her chest. Show me, Dae Ho. Even though I said so, I've never openly masturbated in front of anyone before. It's different from sex. It's a solo play, but I'm being watched and judged. The more I thought about it, the more ridiculous it sounded. I sidled over to her. She trembled a bit, but continued looking at me. I snuck my thumbs behind the waistband of my pants, and pulled everything down to my mid-thighs, underwear included. There was no trouble getting it up. Unha's breasts, even in her modest gown, revealed a lot of cleavage. If that neckline were to go any deeper, I might really consider starting to call her Mom. My hand folded around my dick, and with a few preparatory strokes, it readily woke up, pointing its crimson tip at Unha. A rush of heat enveloped me, my stomach tingling and twisting. I underestimated this body's libido. It barely took 10 seconds for my cock to be at full mast, throbbing and aching to be touched, to release its bottled-up man-cream. Unha hid her mouth behind her hand. She most likely had no idea that my junior would be this huge. I brought my hand down, slowly, and we both watched as my foreskin rolled down, fully exposing the flared gland. Then I slid it back up. Once I set the tempo, I began to pump the shaft a little faster. Unha didn't say a word, she just stared at my fuckstick, entranced. Her whole face was red, a few pearls of sweat running down her cheeks. I stared back at her, drinking in her intoxicated expression, her luscious lips, slightly parted in wonder, and her breasts, which were a bit clammy with sweat. Its sheen reflected off the light. Even though I was the one doing all the work, Unha's breathing got a bit rough. Does it feel good? She asked. Yes, Auntie. I grunted, never breaking eye contact. It feels really good. It was this body's first time experiencing such pleasure, and Unha's presence made it all the better. The way she meekly stared at me, putting on a brave face, only to tear her eyes away and blush. God, it turned me on. You know, it's not nice when I'm the only one doing it. What? Unha drew a gasp at my words. Auntie, have you ever masturbated? Dae Ho. She averted her gaze, hand on her forehead. This is not about me. I hummed. Perhaps, but I just showed you that I'm more than capable of taking care of my needs. What about you, Auntie? Of course. She burst out. I don't believe you. But it was not like the original Dae Ho knew that Unha was not a virgin, or what virginity, in general, even meant. He was so clueless that the poor woman didn't even know where to begin to explain. She didn't believe me when I said so earlier. It's just normal that now I'm the one not to believe her. Tit for tat. Prove it. Unha bit her bottom lip. It's different. Dae Ho. I wouldn't know, would I? A few seconds of tense silence followed. And when my hand started slowing down, Unha finally caved. This is just for the sake of education, okay? She liked to lie to herself. Of course. I replied, a bit surprised that she actually decided to go on with it. What about Uncle Yang-gu? I almost felt bad for him. Was there no loyalty between them? I did catch some warning signs in Dae Ho's memories, but I thought it was all lost in translation. Unha released a shuddering sigh as she made herself more comfortable on my bed, spreading her legs further apart. She curled the bottom hem of her gown up to her thighs, and my breath accelerated at the sight of smooth, milky white skin. Dae Ho, what I'm about to show you, keep it a secret between us. She advised seriously. I nodded numbly, staring at that piece of heaven hidden between her thighs. I couldn't see it, but the outline of her panties was visible. It would let anyone's imagination run wild. Unha took a deep breath, and slid her hand deeper into the crevice of her inner thighs. I saw her fingers moving, slithering past the thin strip of her panties, and, her feet arched, toes curling. That sound she made sent shivers down my spine. She clenched her jaw as her middle finger probed the outer folds. My hand tightened around my shaft, my wrist twisting a bit and applying a circular motion to my strokes. Unha's face was the single most erotic thing I've ever seen. Her blush had spread down to her neck. Glimmering beads of sweat ran down her pleasure-contorted face. Her pouty, full lips were apart, allowing her tongue to crawl out and taste the sex-filled air. I had fucked many hot women in my past life. My status as one of the best footballer in the world was a chick magnet. But this woman, Unha, despite her outward innocence and meek nature, was the sexiest temptress nature bestowed on this world. Steam seemed to come out with each breath she exhaled, with each whine she let out. She glanced at me, tongue still lolled out. Her eyes glimmered with arousal, which stood in heavy contrast against her flushed face. Finally, her finger, after a lot of teasing, slipped inside. HNNN. Unha crammed her eyes shut, her breathing ragged. She trembled, knees touching each other as she clamped her thighs around her hand. My hand was a blur of strokes. My stomach contracted, warning me of the incoming peak of pleasure. Fuck, this is getting out of hand. I mentally laughed at that unintended pun. Auntie. I whispered, my knees wobbly, threatening to collapse under the wave of ecstasy. Dae Ho. Unha stared at me, drunk on the pleasure her fingers were feeding her. Are you about to? And then her eyes widened when a rain of white, sticky substance splattered all over her face. The continuous shot was long and thick, clearly denoting that the years of accumulation had made the eventual outburst even more raging. She was literally bathed in that stuff. Her hair, her face, her tongue, and even her cleavage. None of them were spared. The dollops of cum continued their descent down her nightgown, making everything messy and arousing. Dae Ho. Unha looked up at me, mouth still parted. Her heart was beating with the power of a locomotive off the rails. And so we stood there, staring at each other, flushed, panting. I couldn't believe the power behind that orgasm. It almost knocked me off my feet. I had to say something, because things were definitely getting weird. I'm sorry. It was the right thing to do. Apologize. After all, not every woman likes a facial, especially if it was as sudden as mine was. I couldn't control myself. She was about to say something when a knock sounded out. We both snapped our heads toward the source of the noise. Hey, Dae Ho. You in there? The lights are on. Mia's voice wafted from beyond the door. Chapter 6, She Doesn't Know. Mia's timing couldn't be more impeccable. At least I had the foresight of locking the door, which would buy me enough time to tidy myself up. The lights were on, so there was no way I could avoid her. Unha's cum-slicked face was twisted in a sweaty fluster. Her eyes fixed on me, silently pleading me not to open that door. But not opening it would only arouse more suspicion. The house was big, but not that big. The fact that we both were missing would stir up questions. Naturally, I didn't think that Mia would jump to exaggerated conclusions. But I reminded myself that this world didn't follow the natural rules or the common sense I was used to. And her reaction was not something I was able to predict. Dae Ho, I know you're there. Stop playing and open up. Mia's impatient voice echoed off. Auntie, go hide under my bed. I whispered, nuzzling ei na shoulder. Bebut. Just do it. She bit her bottom lip, got on all fours, sticking up that delicious butt of hers in my direction, before she attempted to crawl under the bed. Now, Unha was not fat by any means. In fact, she was on the thin side, but her curves were more of a hindrance than a help at the moment. She managed to push her upper half under the frame, but her lower half, specifically those two spheres of goodness, prevented her from forcing herself all the way in. Dae Ho, imstuk. She whispered, panicked. Fuck. There was no way this was happening. Unha shook her lively but left and right, bare legs and feet trying to move, but the frame plank pinning her down had paralyzed her movement. Dae Ho. Outside, Mia's impatience was teetering on the edge. I'm coming. One moment, Mia Nuna. I'm naked. So what? It's not like I haven't seen you naked before. I ignored her. Auntie, I'll try to push you in, okay? HM. There was hesitance in her tone, but the urgency of the situation prevailed over it. I walked up to her squirming lower body and placed my hands on her wide backside. She trembled, squeaking a bit. Come on now, don't make such noises. I sighed and squeezed a bit, fingers sinking into the soft, pliable flesh for a better grip. I could hear her breathing heavily under my bed. Slowly, I applied strength to my hands, and started pushing her. The fabric of her nightgown, in that particular area, was quite wet. And considering what we'd been up to 5 minutes earlier, it didn't come as a surprise. With a grunt of exertion, Unha's bubbly rear plopped past the bed frame. I immediately pulled the sheets down, covering that narrow gap between the ground and the bed. I didn't want to take chances. After I made sure I was presentable enough, with my cock back in my pants, I ran up to the door, unlocked it, and swung it open. Mia was on the other side, arms crossed and right foot tapping on the ground. She raised an eyebrow at me. So, what do you need? I asked, catching my breath. Her eyes narrowed. You sure took your sweet time. I've been working out. Naked? I didn't want my clothes to get sweaty. I didn't miss a beat. It looks like you got them sweaty anyway. Mia observed. I looked down at myself, noticing some damp patches. Some of it was sweat all right, but the minor stains were for mine. A much better sight than me completely naked, right? I joked. Mia's lips curled up in amusement. You've changed, Dae Ho. It was weird being addressed as Dae Ho. It was my name, yes, but it was only 2 days old to me, not enough time to grow attached to it. Everyone changes, I said, hoping to put an end to the conversation. True, but you. Mia cupped her chin, eyeing me up and down. But you've gone through such a drastic change that I can't recognize you anymore. Is that a good or bad thing? I probed. Mia went silent for a couple of seconds, chewing it over in her head. Good, she said, at last. You finally decided to grow up. I crossed my arms, amused. Are you proud of me? TCH. She curled a strand of dyed hair around her finger and looked away. I guess. Then, can I come in? She asked, one hand on her hip. It smells inside. Why don't we go over to your room? I suggested. It's fine. I don't mind. Besides, a smirk flashed across her face. I'd really like to see how you're keeping up with your workout schedule. Care to show me? No way. Poor Unha is still under my bed. Can we do it tomorrow, Mia Nuna? You see, I'm really tired right now. I flexed my arms for emphasis. Ho! Chickening out? I smiled. Consider it a tactical retreat if you must. If I were to show you right now, I would only embarrass myself. So why not spare your little bro's dignity and consent to his request? Even the way you talk changed. Mia materda. Did you fall in love with someone? Nope. My reply was steady and honest. There was no reason for her to doubt me. The air of suspicion lessened, but the argument was not over yet. However, a continuous chirping melody rang out from Mia's pocket. She clicked her tongue and pulled her phone out, tapping a quick message to whoever had texted her. She sighed, fixed her eyes back on me, and poked my chest playfully. All right, Mr. Bodybuilder. Tomorrow. Got it? I simply nodded, smile never leaving my face. She stared at me for a few seconds longer before she turned on her heel and walked off, fingers scampering across the keyboard of her smartphone. Once she was out of sight, I heaved a deep sigh. I looked both ways before I retreated inside, locked the door, and leaned against it. You can come out. It's safe now. I announced, mentally tired. These women are going to be the death of me. I noticed some movement underneath my bed before Unha's head shyly poked out, her face flustered. Is she gone? Yes, she didn't suspect anything, hopefully. I couldn't be too sure. Is that so? Unha managed to crawl out from under there without my help. She didn't climb back to her feet, however. She just sat there, on the floor, hunched forward. She was still dirty, so I walked up to a drawer and retrieved a handful of tissues. Here. Stay still. I went down on one knee. Unha looked up at me. I ignored those big, purple, doe eyes of hers and with the utmost tenderness, I started wiping off the sticky trails of cum smeared across her face. What a day, huh? I broke the awkward silence. She stifled back a laugh, fingers over her mouth. I'm glad, though. I raised an eyebrow at that. It looks like you're going to be fine on your own. Sorry for doubting you. I parted a strand of almond brown hair out of her eyes, so I could reach the stained spot behind it. My fingers moved slowly and carefully, dabbing at her forehead with a clean tissue. No, it's fine. While the method was a bit weird, your concern is much appreciated, Auntie. She laughed again, cheeks a bit red. We lapsed into a comfortable silence as I continued working on her face. Here, you're all cleaned up. Then I glanced at her nightgown, which sported visible damp spots. Well, besides that, why don't you take a shower first? HMHM. Una nodded. I extended a hand, which she gladly took. I pulled her up, and she almost tumbled into my arms. Sorry, my legs got numb. I waved her off. Don't worry about it. But you should be quick. Mia Nuna might still be prowling outside, and Sua Nuna likes to get her midnight snacks. It was fine if Sua saw her coming out of my room, but Mia was a different matter. She had a keen intuition, and would definitely pick up on the hidden nuances of our earlier interaction and Unha's stained apparel. Things would blow up into the high heavens. Una nodded seriously. I unlocked the door and quietly opened it. She stepped on the threshold and looked at me, an internal conflict seemingly preventing her from speaking her mind. I didn't need to see the war in her head to know where the issue stemmed from. I won't talk about this with anyone, Auntie. I assured her. It'll be our little secret. She smiled. Good night, Dae Ho. Don't forget to masturbate a lot so you can stay healthy. And then she walked off, the pitter-patter of her bare feet fading into the distance. Might as well get another workout session in. Just to clear my head. Breakfast is ready, Unha yelled from the bottom of the stairs. When Mia walked into the hallway that led to the stairs, she halfway expected to see Dae Ho there as well. Their rooms were next to each other, so it was common for them to make the trip down together. It was almost a rite, at this point. Except that he wasn't there. Mia narrowed her eyes, swept her hair over her shoulder, and headed down. When she got to the kitchen, Dae Ho was already there, at the table. He looked up at her and smiled. "Good morning." That smile was not the one she was used to. Gone was the cheerful light. What replaced it was a sharp curve that sat beneath confident eyes. Mia couldn't comprehend what happened to Dae Ho to undergo this extreme change. Changes seldom were sudden, they were gradual, like growing up. You wouldn't notice until you compare yourself with a picture of the past. A sudden change could be attributed to a traumatic event. It had to be powerful to trigger that kind of mental transformation. Dae Ho had lost his parents, but that was 7 years ago. What happened to him in the span of 2 days? "Good morning." Mia sighed to herself and sat at her usual spot, next to him. A breakup, perhaps? He did say he was not in love with anyone. Maybe he was before, and whoever he was with decided to cut him off. It would also explain why he was so gloomy the other day. She clamped her chopsticks around a strip of fish and tucked it in her mouth. It was not as if Dae Ho seemed to be in pain. There was no reason for her to get involved with his problems, right? But what if it was a facade? A mask to cover the cracks? Mia unconsciously grunted in frustration as she chewed. Such unladylike sounds, Mia Nuna. Dae Ho said with a chuckle. "The food isn't going anywhere." She finished chewing, swallowed, and then turned to glare at him. "You didn't forget your promise, did you?" Dae Ho tapped his chin, faking innocence. "What promise? Why don't I remember?" "Ugh, this guy, kidding." He followed up, that annoying smile fixed in place. "Of course, I didn't forget, Mia Nuna." "Good." She turned away, tucking a wayward shock of hair behind her ear as she did so. Even his presence was different. He wasn't slouching. He wasn't avoiding eye contact. Instead, he sought it with each interaction. It made her a bit flustered, because thinking and speaking while holding that kind of sharp gaze was not simple. It was driving her mad. Her eating became a bit too rough as she stewed in her thoughts. Eventually, Unha joined them at the table, and, for some reason, Mia sensed a slight tension descend upon them. She stared at her mother, whose cheeks were colored a bit as she stole a glimpse of Dae Ho, who smoothly ignored it and continued eating. Mia saw the thoughts spiraling in Unha's eyes. Then, not even a few seconds later, she tore her gaze off Dae Ho, and the tension disappeared. What was that? Chapter 7, Nothing Wrong with This. Breakfast ended on a quiet note. Naturally, because working out right after eating could lead to some digestive issues, we agreed to wait a couple of hours at least. Unha didn't seem to have that problem as she flew from one corner of the house to the other, cleaning and doing household chores. I offered to help, but she politely turned me down. Yes, there was definitely a bit of tension there, between us. It was not my imagination. Was it my fault? No, the only blame I carried was to agree to that ridiculous suggestion yesterday. Still, stress was a thing, especially after going through death, and unloading some of it onto Unha did, in fact, relieve me. Whatever. It's not like it'll happen again, so it's fine. Everything will go back to normal. I should focus on myself. At long last, the clock struck 11 a.m. Mia shuffled her feet and got up from the couch. I also stood up, pocketing away my phone and, along with it, that piece of news I was engrossed with. I made my way to the stairs. Mia was instantly behind me, following quietly. Her eyes tracked my movements with sharp intensity. Once we reached the top, Mia crossed her arms and walked past me. "Let me get changed right quick. Don't you dare come up with another excuse or else." She shook her fist at me, leaving the threat unspoken. And then she skipped over to her room. I shrugged and decided to start without her. I left the door slightly open, as a form of invitation. I tugged at my shirt and slipped out of it, exposing my upper body. This body needed to bulk up a bit. The way it was right now was an absolute embarrassment. I stretched my arms a bit, warming up my muscles, and then I gripped the handles on the pull-up bar. I immediately felt the strain on my joints and muscles. I intended to switch between a normal grip and a reverse one, so I could build up my chest too. Usually, I'd plug in my headphones for some motivational music, but since Mia would join me soon, it would be rude to exercise while completely tuning her out. I pulled myself up, exhaled, lowered myself down, and inhaled. Breathing correctly during workout was important to maximize the gains and avoid injuries. My muscles started to burn, but I continued with the exercise. My back flexed, arms trembling to carry me up again. And then down. Up, down, up, down. Sweat started to glide across my skin. A set of familiar footsteps sounded out. The door creaked a little before it was shut. "You started without me," Mia accused. I lowered myself down completely, hands relinquishing their hold on the bar. "Come on now, don't be a drama queen. It's not like there's a lot to see." I looked at her, briefly stunned by her clothing choice. A purple, sleeveless top that exposed the exquisite crevice between her mounds, and yoga pants. The fabric of her top seemed to cry for help as it threatened to rip apart around Mia's ample chest. As a matter of fact, every garment that she owned seemed to be too little to hold all of that bouncy flesh within them. Mia set the mat that she took with her down. "What are you looking at?" "Nice clothes," I said, chuckling. "Oh?" She held a hand over her mouth to hide the smug smile, like a villain. "You like it?" And then she leaned down a bit, one hand on her knee. I knew what she was trying to do. This vixen is trying to get a reaction out of me. I turned around, barely sparing her a look. "Meh, it's fine, I guess." "You." She narrowed her eyes. "You're doing it on purpose." Riling her up was kind of fun. I grabbed the bar once again. "I'm the embodiment of innocence, am I not, sister?" Her eyes narrowed even further, catching on the lie but not knowing how to refute it. "If you said this a few days ago, I would have agreed, but now." She trailed off with a smirk. I decided to end the conversation there. I pulled myself up once again. Mia positioned the mat next to me, but in a way that wouldn't bother my workout. She got all on fours, hands and knees down. And then she lifted one leg up, staying in that particular position for a determined amount of time before she switched legs. I followed a similar regime. Rest was important as well between each rep. Around the 10-minute mark, I abandoned the bar and began to work with the weights. And because of that, I had a perfect, front-seat view of Mia's flawless, slender body stretching and twisting in enticing ways. Nevertheless, I didn't let myself be distracted. That was until she looked up at me. "Are you really fine, Dae Ho?" "What do you mean?" I returned with a question, my arm burning and struggling to lift the weight up to my chest. There is nothing to do about it. The difference between me and the original Dae Ho is so huge that everyone is noticing it. Yes, I might have decided not to copy Dae Ho's behavior to keep up the act, but it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to ward off those questions or feed them lies that kept them quiet. And, obviously, there was no way I could just come out with the truth. Who'd believe me anyway? The right side of Mia's face was obscured by a mantle of diluted blonde hair, but her left eye shone with interest. Well, it's obvious. You seem to have become a different person overnight. Mom has noticed it. I noticed it. If Sua wasn't so disinterested, she'd have noticed it. Same for Dad. I didn't let her words get to me. There was simply no way that she truly believed I was a different person. She used that statement as a metaphor, not as a claim of fact. "And what is your theory in all of this?" I dug around, trying to unearth what was truly going on in her head. "I don't know what to think." Mia released a breath as she abandoned the pose she was doing, and sat cross-legged on the mat. She was in full conversation mode. "I figured you got dumped by some chick, and all of this sudden, change, and training was your redemption arc." She was surprisingly talkative. But was coming. But Mia chewed her bottom lip, eyes focused on me. The Dae Ho I know would sulk and lock himself up for a while, and then he'd be back to his normal, cheerful self. He's never been this serious. It's really weird to see you like that, and concerning. She was now talking about me in third person. No, she was referring to the old Dae Ho, the one that died a couple of days ago. "Can't you just accept that this is me growing up?" "I can, but this is a bit too sudden for everyone. You seem to have skipped the whole process, and got straight to the grown part. We didn't see it happen, and now we don't know how to deal with you." I heaved a deep sigh and placed the weights down. I walked over to her and sat down on the mat. "Does this change anything between us?" Mia blinked, adopting a thoughtful expression. "I don't think so." I continued evenly. "You said it was a good thing, didn't you?" "I did. I can finally be someone you can rely on, unlike my old self." "Correct? That's..." Mia's lips twitched, not knowing whether to turn into a smile or a frown. "That's yet to be seen." She hummed, flipping her hair around. "In time you'll realize that this change brings nothing but good things," I said, reaching a finger out to wipe a drop of sweat off her forehead, right before it could slide over her left eye. She froze. "I'm fine. Never been better. I just came to realize a few things about myself, and decided to do something about it." I looked back into my past, and saw how useless and aimless I was. I was just wandering around, with no purpose or ambition. But now, I have one. She blinked, lips parting to let the words out, but none came. I capitalized on that. I'm not lost anymore. I know what I want. And I also know how to get it. "I'm glad you're concerned about me, Mia Nuna, but really, there's no need." I flashed her a smile, a genuine one. The one that belonged to Jair Campinho. "Vous." What the hell was that? Mia's breathing was a bit rough as she leaned against the door of her room. Sweat flowed down her face in thin rivulets. She gingerly placed a hand on her chest, feeling the faint throbbing of her heart against her palm. Thump, thump, thump. She clicked her tongue, cheeks a bit flushed. And whether it was due to her yoga or something else altogether, she didn't know. Dae Ho's deep eyes and masculine, workout scent lingered on her mind. Why does he have to say corny stuff like that? TCH, idiot. She dragged herself to her bed and flopped on it, face down. The conversation she had with him went in an unexpected direction, and Mia didn't know what to think anymore. It was hard to think of him as the silly stepbrother that always needed someone to hold his hand. That lost, shy kid had been replaced by a man. Mia turned around, curling one knee up and draping a hand over her forehead. Dae Ho's bare torso came to her mind. It was still skinny, but the constant workout was slowly forging it, one hammering at a time. If he kept that up, she had no doubt that the end result would surprise everyone. Her body was still heated up, pearls of sweat running across her skin. A familiar warmth lit up her stomach. It quickly spread, following the path down to her core. She rubbed her thighs together, in a futile attempt to douse the growing flames, but the friction only made them stronger. The image of Dae Ho gently brushing her hair apart, their faces so close, if only briefly. And then that smile? Thump, 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 fuck. Mia couldn't stay still. She tugged at her top, and pulled it out in one rough motion. Her yoga pants and underwear followed right after, until she was eagle spread on her bed, in a sweaty puddle of her own, while a hand smoothly slid down her slicked stomach. She was frustrated, more so at the fact that it only took one afternoon with Dae Ho to make her like that. Well, it's been a long time since I've done it. That didn't excuse the fact that it was to her supposedly stepbrother that she imagined the hand between her thighs belonged to. Her thoughts were a hazy swirl of confusion and arousal. There's nothing wrong with this. And then her middle finger rubbed the wet slit, probing the pink flesh within. HNN. She arched her back, her other hand going up to cup one of her breasts. The globe of fair-skinned meat sunk into her palm, fingers moving expertly to knead it, to pinch and tweak the cherry in the middle. She moaned, moving her face a little further into the pillow. The polyester muffled the needy mules coming out of her mouth. But it also gave her more reason to be daring. Ah, if only she prepared a towel to soak up the juices beforehand. And so, for the next 20 minutes, Mia's muffled cries rang out. Creator's thoughts. Chapter 8, More Than Good. Go Bong called me to hang out, but I politely turned him down. He had a one-track mind. His thoughts seemed to be sexual in nature even though he hadn't the slightest idea as to what sex even was. Sex is for bad guys. That's all he knew. And until recently, that's all Dae Ho knew too. Despite my gratitude for Uncle Yanggu, that man could have done a better job. His presence was not particularly influential in Dae Ho's life, which resulted in this body's curbed mental growth. I stared at myself in the mirror, sweat pouring down my skin in streams. There were a lot of mistakes to undo. A lot of flaws to fix. I stretched my arms, flexing my shoulders and back. Crazy. I can already see a bit of definition. And it further cemented my belief that this body was either a 1 in a million, or there was a particular condition that improved each aspect of it. It would also explain why, despite having gone through my morning workout, I was still so full of vitality. The only reason I didn't continue was due to my fear of potentially injuring it. In fact, I had to take a day off to let my muscles recover. Too much of something was a bad thing. I turned away and headed to the bathroom to wash the sweat away. A cold shower was the best treat for sore muscles. Once I was done, I made my way back to my room with a towel around my neck and a hazy trail of steam behind me. Right before I could open the door, another one opened. And out of it walked an exhausted Mia. One hand was up, as if to hold the weight of her head. Her gilded mane was a mess, but she still looked gorgeous. Good morning. I greeted pleasantly. Ugh? She groaned. Good morning. You look like you had a rough night. Coming up with a fever or something? Mia's jaw was stiff as she finally turned to look at me. No, I'm fine. A faint rosy hue crept onto her cheeks, though she immediately shook it off. I tilted my head. She was tense. I just had trouble sleeping. I stared at her, noticing the way she nervously averted her gaze. And from that angle, her curtain of flaxen hair hid those beautiful, almond eyes. You should stop using your phone before sleep. It's ruining your brain. What are you, my dad? Despite my not seeing it, I could definitely imagine her rolling her eyes at my words. She crossed her arms, interlocking them right under her bust. Besides, it's not like I was talking to anyone in particular. I didn't know what to make of that. So I decided to skip straight through it and move on to a different topic. Hey, I've been meaning to ask. Do we still have that white, leather ball we used to play around with? Mia was a bit stumped by my non sequitur. Ball? That was years ago, Dae Ho. If Mom didn't throw it away, then it should be in the garage. I see. I rubbed my chin and thought. I wondered if I should just buy a new one at this point. Thank you, I'll check it out later. My hand twisted the knob. The door creaked open. Why? Mia's question stopped me. You've never been interested in sports. Maybe I've just found my passion? She was silent for a few seconds, then she uncrossed her arms and placed her hands on her hips. I'll help you look for it, she said haughtily. Really? That's sweet of you. I smiled. We can get started right after breakfast. A nod was her reply before she flipped her hair around and walked past me. I stepped inside my room and closed the door. I tossed the towel over the backrest of a chair and started rummaging around for clothes. Note to self, buy better clothes. Some of these shorts were so small and tight that, if I didn't have Dae Ho's memories, I would have believed they belonged to Mia. Thankfully, not all hope was lost. I found a slim, black shirt and a pair of white shorts that was not something one of stepsisters would wear to sleep. Breakfast is ready. As if on cue, Eun-ha announced in that lovely, cheerful voice of hers. I made my way down. Eun-ha was wearing her flowery, blue apron and dishwashing gloves. Good morning, Dae Ho, she said, smile bright enough to power an entire electrical grid. Morning, Auntie. I took my seat at the table, noticing the bowls and plates full of delicious, Korean-style food. Su, Eunamit. Have you been having any issues? Oh, she's bringing that up again? Nope, everything is fine. Good, good. I'm glad. She chirped, removing her rubber gloves and proceeding to sit down across from me. The tension between us lessened a bit. When will Uncle be back? I asked offhandedly. Oh, he should be back tomorrow. And here I thought she'd be happier to see him again. The sound of footsteps drew my attention to the stairs, where Mia came down, barefoot, donning a tight blouse and dolphin shorts. She was born with her sex appeal maxed out. I doubted there was any article of clothing out there that could make her look bad. After a new round of good mornings, Mia plopped her rear next to me, picked up her chopsticks, and started to eat. I couldn't help but notice her stealing glimpses. And every time I turned to catch her red-handed, she'd immediately look away and stuff a chopstickful of rice into her mouth, pretending nothing was wrong. I didn't remember Mia behaving this way. We used to play a lot when we were younger. And although she remained the kind young woman that wormed her way into my, Dae Ho's, heart, she grew up to be a bit standoffish. Of course, the young woman next to me was nothing like the girl I first met all of those years ago. Her dyed, butter yellow hair seemed more like an act of defiance against nature and social stigma than pure personal choice. Yes, she was incomparably more complex now, a cauldron of bubbling emotions tightly kept behind a haughty mask. Mia tucked a hefty strand of hair behind her ear as she leaned ever so slightly, mouth open to welcome the chopsticks. And as she did so, her eyes flicked toward me. It was only for a second. Hard to miss yet harder to catch her in the act. I ignored it and quietly finished my breakfast. Eun-ha and Mia were also done, so the former got up and started her cleaning duties, customarily refusing our offer to help. I signaled Mia with my eyes. She promptly nodded and caught up to me. The garage was a bit dusty, but overall tidier than I expected. There was steel shelving on one side, their space filled with pails of paint. On the other side, instead, cardboard boxes were stacked up on top of each other. In the middle was a dust-free zone where Yonggu's car was parked. Except that the car wasn't there. It should be in one of those boxes. Mia noted, tapping her chin. We keep all of the old stuff in there. I walked up to one of the boxes and started to go through it. Mia wasn't idle and joined me right away, wrinkling her nose at the clouds of dust that billowed up whenever we moved the items. Are you serious about this? It's just an old ball. We can find something else to do, Mia said, coughing and waving her hand to disperse the specks of dust dancing on her face. I observed, amused. Why, you don't want to play with me? I shrugged. Do you even know how to kick a ball, or should I teach you? Her eyes gleamed with interest. You're talking as if you're some expert. Her villain-like smirk was in full place. All right, I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, Dae Ho. But why don't we bet on it? I blinked, tilting my head from my crouched position to look at her better. You want to bet with me? Of course. Mia's white teeth were on full display. She placed a hand on her hip and leaned on one side. If you manage to impress me, I promise I'll do anything you want. That sounds juicy. All right, I'm in. I chuckled. I'm not finished. She chided me as she flipped her hair around, staring at me with a faux condescending look. If you fail, you'll do anything I want. That's a dangerous game you're playing. I hummed, finding the whole situation humorous. She chuckled behind a hand. Oh, not at all. Then she plunged her hands inside a cardboard box, and when she pulled them back out, a ball was in her grasp. Found it. The white, leather sphere was a bit peeled off, but it looked fine. Mia threw it at me. I caught it, and just to mess around with her, I started spinning it on top of my finger. There's a football pitch nearby. We could go there, I said, watching as the ball whirled faster and faster, its balance never breaking, much to Mia's growing amazement. Oh, and by the way, my request will involve a humiliating outfit, a handful of oil, and a relaxing massage. The cocky smile on her face twitched. You better be as good as you say. Dear, I'm more than good. Chapter 9, MVP. There was a time, not too long ago, when Mia genuinely believed her goofy stepbrother, Dae Ho, would have a hard time keeping himself afloat in the adult world. This concern stemmed from his seemingly lack of talent or interest in any particular field. It was a highly competitive world out there, and he was not prepared for it. Her expectations, however, didn't match reality. What is this? Mia couldn't help but gawk as she stared at that goofy brother of hers, except that he wasn't goofy anymore. He took one preparatory step back, the grass crunching under his shoes. He squared his shoulders, did a little jog on the spot, and then bolted his left foot forward, at the side of the ball, and with his right one, he shot. Mia's breath came out in an incredulous, rattling exhale. The ball rocketed out, drawing a beautiful overhead arch, before it slammed into the crossbar of the post. Mia could almost feel the vibration spreading through the white-painted aluminum and into her heart. An ignorant passerby might have thought that Dae Ho had missed the shot, even though the goalpost was empty, and, technically, scoring shouldn't have required particular focus or skill. That same ignorant passerby would also not know that Dae Ho was currently doing a crossbar challenge, and that was his 6th, perfect crossbar hit in a row. But Mia knew. Dae Ho never once missed. There was no hesitation, no wavering in his eyes. Each shot was thrown with such proficiency that even a random group of kids occupying the other half of the pitch stopped playing to watch him. Hitting the crossbar once could have been considered luck. Twice a coincidence. What about 3 times? 4 times? 5 times? 6 fucking times? Why did you stop? Mia couldn't help but ask once she caught up with him, a glistening pearl of sweat making a beeline for the valley of her cleavage. Dae Ho shrugged, eyes distant. 6 is a symbolic number for me, he said wistfully. Huh? That serious, gloomy expression melted off his face, leaving the shadow of a smile in its place. He tilted his head to look at her. Why don't you try as well? He suggested, tapping the ball under his foot. It went rolling towards her. Mia stopped it with the sole of her right foot. I don't know. I've never done it before. It's fine. I'll teach you, it's not hard. Those words didn't exactly boost her confidence, but she was not the type of girl that'd give up without trying, at least. Besides, they had come here for a reason. A bit of pink came over to her cheeks. And if you suck, I promise that I won't laugh. Dae Ho smiled at her. Mia stared at the hand behind his back and narrowed her eyes. You're crossing your fingers, aren't you? His smile turned into a smirk reminiscent of hers. I would never. All right, she raised her hands in surrender. So, what do I have to do to hit a shot like yours? Baby steps, Mia Nuna. Dae Ho said, prompting her to step back. So, what you want to do is to use a specific part of your foot to hit the ball. What? Is it that complicated? Mia griped. It's not. It might sound a bit daunting at first, but once you get the gist of it and practice it regularly, it'll come as second nature. Dae Ho explained patiently. At her unamused stare, he continued. Typically, you should use the laces of your shoes to hit the ball. I say typically, because there are different techniques, but we're not going over them. We just want you to properly shoot the ball. She took a few steps back, mimicking his earlier positioning. Now what? Now you do a little sprint to pick up power, and shoot. Simple as that. He reminded her. Don't forget to use the laces of your shoe and not the tip. Mia eyed the ball in front of her as if it were her enemy. All right, I got this. She did his funny pre-shooting jog, planted her left foot forward, and with her dominant one, she struck the ball. She didn't know if she hit it correctly, though considering that the ball missed the mark by an absurdly wide margin, it was safe to assume that she failed. Oh well, it was not like she was planning to become a professional player. To her, it was just a sport. What was the appeal of running after a ball anyway? It was not bad. Dae Ho assurd. Mia sighed. No, it's not for me. I'd rather watch you play. He tilted his head. What about the bet? TCH. Mia turned away, flipping her sweat-slicked hair to the side. Are you making fun of me? Why would I? Shut up and play some more. I'll watch you from the side. Besides, my toes are killing me. With that, she proceeded to plop herself down outside the pitch, arms wrapped around her raised knees. Stupid bet. She thought to herself, already dreading the humiliating request Dae Ho would no doubt remind her of. Whatever. It's just a massage. Mia heaved a deep sigh as she watched Dae Ho's dominance over the ball. It was glued to his feet, no matter what it did. Even the way he ran around, dribbling invisible opponents, and swirling the ball around himself in a dazzling display of pure skill and talent. It was incredibly pleasing to watch. He made it look so easy too. She kind of wanted to see him play against real opponents, though. There must have been a god out there who had the same thought as her, for a couple of kids dislodged themselves from their group of 7, and approached Dae Ho. She blinked. Ho? Dae Ho stopped juggling the ball and stared at them. One of the boys smiled and struck a conversation, though, from her distance, she couldn't hear what they could possibly be talking about. Her little brother nodded along to whatever the boy was saying, and some sort of agreement was made. Dae Ho was invited to join them over the other half of the pitch. The group of now 8 guys converged. More discussion ensued, before a round of nods from each of them decided the result. Mia leaned back on her elbows, draping one leg over the other. The group, along with Dae Ho, spread out over the entirety of the pitch. 4 players on one side, and 4 on the other. Oh, are they going to play? Mia shuffled, now sitting cross-legged. Her eyes were locked on Dae Ho, who didn't seem either nervous or excited. The captains of each team tossed a coin up in the air to determine who'd start the kickoff. In a stroke of fortune, Dae Ho's team was chosen for the opening. Usually, a whistle would be the green light for the match to start, but since there was no referee, a silent consensus was all they needed. One of the boys gently tapped the ball at the center of the pitch. Dae Ho received it and passed it back. The pitch was quite big for only 4 players per team, but it was doable. Mia watched the match disinterestedly, until Dae Ho got the ball. One of the opponents was immediately on him, but Dae Ho's composure was steady. The wind brushed his hair, ruffling it, as he slid the outer side of his right foot over the ball, curving it, and bringing it to the inside of his boot in one swift movement. His elastico left the opponent dumbstruck. Dae Ho sped past him. Mia balled her hands into fists. Amazing. It was too soon to celebrate. Another player hastened to close in on Dae Ho, but the latter solved him with a perfectly executed rainbow flick. Mia didn't see exactly how he did it, but the ball had suddenly soared up from behind him, and vaulted over the defender, before Dae Ho reclaimed it with an impeccable stop from his foot. All 3 players scurried like rodents after Dae Ho. The goalkeeper realized the threat he posed and retreated. Unfortunately for him, the striker encroaching into the penalty spot at a fast speed was a brilliant finisher. Left foot forward. Right foot loaded back. And then Dae Ho slammed his instep into the sphere. The ball was not packed with a lot of force. Actually, there was very little of it. Accuracy over power. Dae Ho had added a side spin to the ball, and that resulted in a beautiful curve that left the goalkeeper motionless and helpless. It socketed itself into the top right corner of the net. Mia never thought of football as a particularly exciting sport, but Dae Ho's sudden show of absolute dominance made her heart thrum. She couldn't tear her gaze off him. He didn't celebrate the stunning goal he scored. He just smiled and waved at his cheering teammates. Why isn't he proud of what he just did? She bit her bottom lip. The game eventually resumed with a new kickoff, this time in favor of the opposite team. Mia heard the chattering of people and looked around, only to notice that a small audience of spectators was paying attention to the ongoing match. Mia could hardly believe that a game between some random kids had the potential to draw in viewers. Was it the love for the sport or because of Dae Ho? She shook that thought off and focused on the game. The opposite team had lost the ball right before they could exploit an opening and score. Now the ball lay under the defender's foot. Mia couldn't help but scream in her head. Come on, pass it to him. Pass it to him. Please. The defender also saw the logic behind that thought and thus kicked the ball in Dae Ho's direction. An enemy defender immediately sprinted to intercept the pass, but he didn't run fast enough. Dae Ho balanced the ball on his foot, slid the sphere a bit forward, and kicked it. The ball crossed through the air before it gently eased in on his teammate's awaiting foot. Mia was surprised by the sheer precision of that pass. And so was Dae Ho's teammate. There was quite a bit of distance between them after all, and it was easy to miscalculate the power or the trajectory, especially when pressed by a defender. But the ball was like a magnet, a missile locking onto its target. Why did you pass it? Mia lamented. She really wanted to see him make a fool of the enemy team. Fortunately, the teammate realized that too, and after failing to dribble past an opponent, decided to pass it back to him. Mia hastily pulled her phone out and started recording. That day, she ended up recording an unprecedented one-sided slaughter, all at the hands, or in this case, feet, of one player. The final score? 16-2. And out of those 16 goals, Dae Ho scored 13. Mia would go on to rewatch that video again and again in the privacy of her room. What both of them didn't know, however, was that someone else was recording the match as well. Chapter 10, Massage. Gone wrong. The early wisps of dawn bathed the cityscape in a soft, wheat yellow tint. A burning strain constricted my chest, but I kept my breathing even. My heels ached with each step, the pain radiating up to my calves. It was early in the morning, approximately 6 a.m. when I left home to work on my cardio. I forgot how hard it was at the beginning. Beads of sweat poured down my face, tracing salty paths in their wake. My tracksuit was soaked, a consequence of running laps around the neighborhood. I couldn't afford to take it easy. I was 20 years old. If I wanted to make something of my future, I had to work now. The soft rush of a breeze kissed my slicked face, making me sigh from the momentary reprieve. I was almost tempted to take a break and enjoy the coddling embrace of the weather. But I didn't. I had gone through this before. My will had been sharpened with blood and tears. I could endure this much. Breaking through self-imposed limits was tough, but I was experienced with such hurdles. There was no devil on my shoulder telling me to give up. For every lap I ran, I'd tell myself to go for one more. Just one more. My shoes pounded the asphalt, releasing the dimming energy with an unsteady jog. I felt my legs screaming in protest, my muscles shaking and straining. I was almost done. I wanted to finish this one last lap before I completely drained whatever little strength was left in my reserve tank. I breathed sharply, the morning air biting into my lungs. I clenched my jaw and pushed harder, dragging my feet despite their sluggishness. I passed by familiar houses, familiar roads, familiar memories. And then I slowed down to a stop in front of my house, my starting point. I panted, hands on my knees and back hunched forward. Drops of sweat rained down my face, splattering on the ground. I hissed as I straightened my back. Tomorrow is going to be a huge pain in the ass. If the ache right now was bad, then the next morning it was going to be hell. Oh. Well, no pain, no gain. I headed inside. The rousing sun's rays illuminated a bit of the house. No one was up yet, though I did overhear Eunha saying that she would be up early to welcome the return of Yanggu with a sumptuous breakfast. I gulped, feeling the parchness of my throat, like sandpaper. I somehow managed to carry myself to the kitchen. I raised an eyebrow when I noticed some movement behind the counter. Someone was already there. The fridge was open. The sound of my footsteps alerted the crouched silhouette rummaging around the stored food. A head peeked out, stoic eyes staring at me. Sua? Good morning. She fully stood up, a couple of snacks in her hands. She nodded at me. Good morning. It's kinda awkward. Sua preferred the silence over some pointless, small talk. Naturally, I respected that. I skirted around the counter, grabbed a glass, and poured myself some water. One was not enough, so I kept pouring and drinking until my stomach was bloated. Where have you been? I blinked, caught off guard by the question. I turned around, making eye contact with Sua. And here I thought she'd scamper away as soon as she got her winter provisions. Instead, her eyes never left me. I went out for a run. Why? I asked back, wiping my damp face with a handful of tissues. Sua blinked with a slight tilt of her head. I see. And then she walked off, her footfalls fading upstairs. I sighed. It was not as if I was interested in being best chummy with her, but our relationship was quite poor considering we've been living under the same roof for 7 years. Our personalities differed. At least, the original Dae Ho's personality did. Girls, I'm home. Yanggu announced with a silly smile. And along with his suitcase, he had brought back a few more items. I had just come downstairs to grab a bite when I heard his voice. Euna smiled pleasantly. Welcome back, how was the trip, honey? And then she moved to help him. That box of apples looked quite heavy, so I promptly stopped her. Let me do it, auntie. She laughed and offered a soft, thank you. Where is Mia? Yanggu wondered. The box of chocolate secured in his arm suddenly disappeared. Yanggu rubbed the back of his head when he saw Mia plainly ignoring him in favor of fawning over the cocoa goodness he brought back as a gift. Yay, chocolate. She gushed with stars in her eyes. I placed the box of apples on a nearby table. Mia's hair swished past me as she dashed upstairs to enjoy her confectionery. Mia. Eunha called her out with an exasperated look of fondness. Yeah. If there was one thing Mia worshipped more than her smartphone, it was chocolate. I had to chuckle at that, and at the fact that her body proportions wouldn't change even if she ate that every day. Yanggu slipped an arm around Eunha's wasp-thin waist. She looked slightly uncomfortable, directing a hard-to-decipher look my way. If I could read her mind right now, what kind of intricate mess would I find? She said everything was fine, yet I couldn't help but notice the red flags she was internally waving, almost like a cry for help. I walked over to them and slid a smile into my face. "Uncle, did you get anything for me?" "Oh." Yang-gu returned the smile with an awkward one. "I didn't know you wanted anything in particular, Dae Ho. I didn't get you anything. Next time, alright?" "Of course." I tapped my chin. "Uncle, actually, I have a favor to ask of you. Could you check up on the pull-up bar you bought me? It had to be assembled and fixed on the wall, though I'm not quite sure if I got everything right. I wouldn't want any nasty surprises when I'm working out." "That's alright." Yang-gu pulled his arm off of Unha. "That could be dangerous indeed. If you didn't rivet them correctly, they could slip off the wall. Let me take a look." "Thank you." I beamed as I gestured with my head and led him to my room. I briefly looked back at Unha, who had her hands clasped together and the ghost of a smile on her face. I didn't know if what I was doing was correct or warranted, but I couldn't simply ignore the warning signs. I just hoped that nothing bad could come out because of my intervention. Star operator. Chamiai Sipiovu. "Alright. It's just a massage." "A massage?" The smile on her face twitched. It was soon taken over by a frown, her cheeks slightly rosy. The problem wasn't the massage. It was the outfit. She didn't own any particularly humiliating clothes, but she did have a regretful purchase a couple of years ago. It was the eve of Halloween, and a nurse costume was on discount. She wore it once, and never again. She wanted to look good, not slutty. Then again, wasn't Halloween a good excuse to dress up without inhibitions and not be called out for it? Naturally, Mia waited until everyone had gone to sleep. She would never be able to explain herself if someone caught her garb like that. Damn bet. I should have kept my mouth shut. She grabbed a bottle of sweet almond oil, pocketed it in her tight, white and red uniform, and walked out of her room. The hallway was barely lit up by a ring of moonlight. Fortunately, Dae Ho's room was right next to hers. With a deep, preparatory sigh, she headed towards it. Her heels clacked rhythmically, almost in sync with her heart. There was a faint excitement buried beneath all of that fear and humiliation. She knocked on the door. The sound of footsteps drew closer. A click rang out, and the door creaked open. Dae Ho's bare-chested form was revealed in the dim lighting of his room. His messy hair was wet, while a towel hung loosely around his neck. She caught a shuddering breath before it could slip past her lips. He stared at her. "Well?" Mia crossed her arms and averted her gaze, hiding part of her face behind a well-groomed curtain of hair. "Don't misunderstand, Dae Ho. I'm here because a promise is a promise." A smile bloomed on his face. "That's unexpected." "Why?" She huffed. "I lost the bet." "True, but I admit that my request might have been a bit too much for you. I thought you wouldn't do it," he said, leaning on the frame of the door. He eyed her up and down, trailing every smooth curve, every inch of her exposed skin. "You even dressed up?" Mia waved her hair around, her uncovered eye narrowing. A haughty smile developed across her face. "HMHM. How is it? Is it to your fancy, Dae Ho? You're beautiful, regardless of what you wear, Mia Nuna." Dae Ho said genuinely. She felt her cheeks heat up even further. She turned away, fingers going up to play with a strand of her hair. "Are you going to let me stand here all night?" she said, sounding annoyed, but both of them knew it was a front. "Kumin." He chuckled, inviting her inside with an overly dramatic wave of his hand. She immediately waltzed in. Her heart leaped when she heard the door close. "Let's get this over with," she said, smoothing out the wrinkles on her skirt. "Lie down. I'm going to thoroughly enjoy every second of this." Dae Ho strutted towards his bed with a cocky smile, and hopped on it, face down. "Oh, worry not, my dearest brother," Mia said with a mischievous glint in her eyes. "No one gives body massages as I do." And then she walked up to him, climbed on the bed, and straddled the lower part of his back. She shuffled a bit to get more comfortable. "Dae Ho groaned." "What?" Mia hissed, almost offended. "I don't weigh a lot. Doi? You're as light as a feather." "Good." She blushed a bit as her core accidentally ground against his bare back. Did he notice it? She wondered as she removed the towel from his neck to get better access to his muscles. Mia pulled out the bottle of oil, uncapped it, and squeezed a generous dollop of it on his back and her hands. She released a soft breath as she spread her oil-slicked palms across his wide and well-developing back. A muffled groan flew out. She gulped as her hands felt the array of muscles behind his smooth, taut skin. She pressed the pads of her fingers on strategic points, neither too hard nor too soft. A perfect balance of skill and strength was required to deliver a massage. "Your hands feel really good, sis," he said, and somehow his words felt so wrong in her ears, yet she couldn't help but blush a little harder. "Shut up. No speaking." "Can I moan?" "No moaning either. It's distracting," Mia said pompously. Dae Ho released a frustrated sigh. Good boy. Mia cooed, her talented hand sliding up, towards his shoulders. She sunk her fingers into the flesh, stimulating the growing muscles underneath. At first, she wanted to hurt him a little bit, as some sort of payback for making her dress up like that, but now, her pantyhose-clad thighs clamped a little tighter around his waist. She was wearing a skirt, a frilly, short thing, really. Which meant that her private parts were in full contact with Dae Ho's warm skin. Mia gritted her teeth, blaming her body for acting up like that. Masturbating is not enough anymore, she thought morosely. And with someone underneath her, fully exposed and unprotected, her mind couldn't help but arouse certain thoughts. Usually, she would not be excited like that. However, this was a special circumstance. Her interactions with Dae Ho, and their time spent together, built up into something that couldn't be ignored anymore. Dae Ho squirmed a little, which intensified the friction. Shit. Mia bit her bottom lip to stop herself from voicing out any sort of indecent noise. Don't move, she whispered, hunching her back to paste herself all over his back. Her large, perky breasts squished into him, and there was no doubt in her mind that he could feel them. Her hair fell all over his neck, its flaxen strands tickling his skin. The massage continued, but it was sloppy now. Most of his back was occupied by her writhing upper body while she mindlessly ground herself against him. Her hands clawed at his shoulders, moving, pressing, and scratching. Mia Nona? Dae Ho spoke up, rearing his head a little. I have to stop this. It's fine, Dae Ho. It's part of the massage, a Mia Nuna special. He didn't buy that. Maybe if he was the old Dae Ho, he wouldn't have questioned it. Shoo, Mia kud panting. Stay still. He was about to say something when a soft tapping on wood echoed off. Dae Ho, are you awake? Eunha's alluring voice drifted from behind the door. Mia froze. And so did Dae Ho. Chapter 11, Truth. There's no way this is happening again. It was already bad with Mia not so discreetly performing dubious things to my back, but now I had to deal with Eunha as well. They'd both be in the same room, except that one of them would not be aware of the presence of the other. Eunha wouldn't be seeking me out at this time if the nature of her conversation was innocent. And when it came to that woman, there was no innocence to her thoughts. She had no filter when alone with me. Crap. Mia panicked. Vad dovedo? Getting off of me would be a good start. I whispered, a measure of composure in my tone. That seemed to ease her a bit as she rolled off, her nylon-clad feet thumping lightly against the floor. I hastily stood up as well. Dae Ho? Eunha knocked again, this time considerably louder. The lights were on, and just like last time, there was no avoiding this. Maybe I can climb down the window? Mia offered uncertainly. I was almost tempted to consider it as a viable solution if not for the fact that we were on the second floor. And I'd rather deal with the embarrassment of the situation than her potentially slipping off and injuring herself. If only I didn't request her to dress up like that. I lamented. There was nothing wrong with a massage between siblings, but there was a world of wrong when that massage was done in such an erotic context. I'm coming, Auntie. 1 minute, please. I yelled. Then I leaned closer to Mia, unconsciously inhaling a whiff of her perfume, and whispered furiously. Don't do such a stupid thing. Go hide under the bed and wait until I shoo her away. Under the bed? Mia parroted incredulously. It's clean under there. I shot back, slowly losing my cool. Much better than letting her see you like that, isn't it? TCH. Mia clicked her tongue and dropped to her knees. I watched as she crawled her way under the bed. Everything was fine until her hips found themselves at crossroads with the frame of the bed. And as a result of her squirming, her nurse skirt rode up, exposing 2 fair-skinned peaches, divided only by a thin strip of cotton. Dae Ho. No, not again. A little help? I'm stuck. I'm going to burn that fucking bed. I walked up to Mia, crouched down, and grabbed those tantalizing cheeks. HNN. I ignored the quiet mule she let out, and pushed. A gradual push would just be a waste of time, and time was something I didn't have right now. So I counted up to 3, and shoved that little piece of heaven under my bed in one powerful thrust. HNNN. For fuck's sake, stop with the sounds. I lowered the sheets, scurried back up to my feet, and hurried to open the door. Eunha stood there in her beautiful, midnight blue nightgown. A look of concern was etched on her face, which stood in contrast with the faint blush on her cheeks. Dae Ho, is everything all right? Oh yes. I was just. I sighed. Staying healthy. Oh. A look of realization crossed her face, and her blush flared. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. No, it's fine. I waved her off. Can you come back later? I kinda want to finish. Euna blinked. And contrary to my expectations, she didn't move. I wanted to take you up on that offer. she said, at last. But, do you need help? The question came out of those plump, carmine lips in a tentative manner. And I didn't need to think twice to know how bad of a decision it would be to agree to that. You know, to be quicker. No. Fucking. Way. I got it, Auntie. Don't you worry. I appeased her. I can take care of it myself. I see. Unha looked away, rubbing her left arm. I'll leave you to it then. She tried to hide it, but only a hopeless fool would miss the vulnerable look in her eyes. This is not going to have a happy ending. Wait. I called out before she could turn away. She stared at me, waiting for my next words. Now, there was a spark of hope in those violet orbs. I couldn't turn her down like that. Not when I was the one who offered that shoulder to cry on. I can finish later. I continued, and I couldn't help but feel a slight heat in my chest when her lips curved into a dazzling smile. The tears swelling up at the corner of her eyes didn't seem about to fall anymore. But, can we talk about this somewhere else? Isn't your room good? Unha asked in a soft voice. No, absolutely not. I immediately denied. I had to avoid the kind of scenario where Mia could freely eavesdrop on Unha's unfiltered, potentially serious conversation. Why not? Why don't we go for a walk instead, to cool our boiling emotions? I offered. She thought it over and agreed with another beautiful smile. That actually sounds good. Great. Let me put on a shirt right quick and I'll be ready to go. I'll wait for you downstairs then. I watched as she rounded up the corner and traipsed down, a sad smile stitched on that perfectly sculpted face. I closed the door with a heavy sigh. Her timing couldn't be worse. This room is cursed. You can come out, Mia Nuna. I stated. The sheets curled up as Mia paddled her way out. There was a sullen pout on her lips. It feels like I'm a cheap whore hiding away from the lover's wife. She grunted in annoyance. I don't like it. She got up and dusted her stained costume. I was about to console her, but she glared at me, effectively shutting me up with the full might of those pretty yet angry eyes. I heard what you two were saying. I'm quite the smooth talker, aren't I? I jested. Mia crossed her arms, wrinkling her nose. What's up with you and Mom? Nothing. Why? I quenched the concern in my voice behind a smile. It sounds like there's some sort of secret between you two. I can't let her poke into that rabbit hole. I need to divert her attention. I walked up to Mia, and before she could react, cupped her chin. I chuckled as the faded blush on her cheeks flared back to life. You're so cute when you frown like that, Mia Nuna. And with that nurse costume, at this point you're just teasing me. I didn't inch closer, but I didn't back out either. Auntie just wanted to talk about my sudden change. She's such a worrywart, stubborn too. Quite like you, in that regard. She broke free of my grasp. Whatever. The blush was still vivid on her face, her breathing slightly accelerated. I don't care. And then she made to walk away. Chapter 11. Truth. There's no way this is happening again. It was already bad with Mia not so discreetly performing dubious things to my back, but now I had to deal with Unha as well. They'd both be in the same room, except that one of them would not be aware of the presence of the other. Unha wouldn't be seeking me out at this time if the nature of her conversation was innocent. And when it came to that woman, there was no innocence to her thoughts. She had no filter when alone with me. Crap. Mia panicked. Våld dovedo? Getting off of me would be a good start. I whispered, a measure of composure in my tone. That seemed to ease her a bit as she rolled off, her nylon-clad feet thumping lightly against the floor. I hastily stood up as well. Dae Ho? Unha knocked again, this time considerably louder. The lights were on, and just like last time, there was no avoiding this. Maybe I can climb down the window? Mia offered uncertainly. I was almost tempted to consider it as a viable solution if not for the fact that we were on the second floor. And I'd rather deal with the embarrassment of the situation than her potentially slipping off and injuring herself. If only I didn't request her to dress up like that. I lamented. There was nothing wrong with a massage between siblings, but there was a world of wrong when that massage was done in such an erotic context. I'm coming, Auntie. 1 minute, please. I yelled. Then I leaned closer to Mia, unconsciously inhaling a whiff of her perfume, and whispered furiously. Don't do such a stupid thing. Go hide under the bed and wait until I shoo her away. Under the bed? Mia parroted incredulously. It's clean under there. I shot back, slowly losing my cool. Much better than letting her see you like that, isn't it? TCH. Mia clicked her tongue and dropped to her knees. I watched as she crawled her way under the bed. Everything was fine until her hips found themselves at crossroads with the frame of the bed. And as a result of her squirming, her nurse skirt rode up, exposing 2 fair-skinned peaches, divided only by a thin strip of cotton. Dae Ho. No, not again. A little help? I'm stuck. I'm going to burn that fucking bed. I walked up to Mia, crouched down, and grabbed those tantalizing cheeks. HNN. I ignored the quiet mule she let out, and pushed. A gradual push would just be a waste of time, and time was something I didn't have right now. So I counted up to 3, and shoved that little piece of heaven under my bed in one powerful thrust. HNNN. For fuck's sake, stop with the sounds. I lowered the sheets, scurried back up to my feet, and hurried to open the door. Eunha stood there in her beautiful, midnight blue nightgown. A look of concern was etched on her face, which stood in contrast with the faint blush on her cheeks. Dae Ho, is everything all right? Oh yes. I was just. I sighed. Staying healthy. Oh. A look of realization crossed her face, and her blush flared. Sorry, I didn't want to interrupt you. No, it's fine. I waved her off. Can you come back later? I kinda want to finish. Euna blinked. And contrary to my expectations, she didn't move. I wanted to take you up on that offer, she said, at last. But, do you need help? The question came out of those plump, carmine lips in a tentative manner. And I didn't need to think twice to know how bad of a decision it would be to agree to that. You know, to be quicker. No. Fucking. Way. I got it, Auntie. Don't you worry. I appeased her. I can take care of it myself. I see. Eunha looked away, rubbing her left arm. I'll leave you to it then. She tried to hide it, but only a hopeless fool would miss the vulnerable look in her eyes. This is not going to have a happy ending. Wait. I called out before she could turn away. She stared at me, waiting for my next words. Now, there was a spark of hope in those violet orbs. I couldn't turn her down like that. Not when I was the one who offered that shoulder to cry on. I can finish later. I continued, and I couldn't help but feel a slight heat in my chest when her lips curved into a dazzling smile. The tears swelling up at the corner of her eyes didn't seem about to fall anymore. But, can we talk about this somewhere else? Isn't your room good? Eunha asked in a soft voice. No, absolutely not. I immediately denied. I had to avoid the kind of scenario where Mia could freely eavesdrop on Eunha's unfiltered, potentially serious conversation. Why not? Why don't we go for a walk instead, to cool our boiling emotions? I offered. She thought it over and agreed with another beautiful smile. That actually sounds good. Great. Let me put on a shirt right quick and I'll be ready to go. I'll wait for you downstairs then. I watched as she rounded up the corner and traipsed down, a sad smile stitched on that perfectly sculpted face. I closed the door with a heavy sigh. Her timing couldn't be worse. This room is cursed. You can come out, Mia Nuna. I stated. The sheets curled up as Mia paddled her way out. There was a sullen pout on her lips. It feels like I'm a cheap whore hiding away from the lover's wife. She grunted in annoyance. I don't like it. She got up and dusted her stained costume. I was about to console her, but she glared at me, effectively shutting me up with the full might of those pretty yet angry eyes. I heard what you two were saying. I'm quite the smooth talker, aren't I? I jested. Mia crossed her arms, wrinkling her nose. What's up with you and Mom? Nothing. Why? I quenched the concern in my voice behind a smile. It sounds like there's some sort of secret between you two. I can't let her poke into that rabbit hole. I need to divert her attention. I walked up to Mia, and before she could react, cupped her chin. I chuckled as the faded blush on her cheeks flared back to life. You're so cute when you frown like that, Mia Nuna. And with that nurse costume, at this point you're just teasing me. I didn't inch closer, but I didn't back out either. Auntie just wanted to talk about my sudden change. She's such a worrywart, stubborn too. Quite like you, in that regard. She broke free of my grasp. Whatever. The blush was still vivid on her face, her breathing slightly accelerated. I don't care. And then she made to walk away. The air was a little chilly. Surprising. Considering how hot the days had been. Dae Ho, true to his words, had clothed himself faster than it took her husband to fall asleep, whenever she refused his ill-conceived advances, that is. Meanwhile, she draped a light jacket over her shoulders, using it more as a blanket than an indument. Dae Ho tiptoed his way down the stairs. Eunha couldn't help but smile a bit. It was almost as if they were about to go on a secret, forbidden rendezvous. Ready? He asked, offering his elbow with a gentlemanly dip of his head. She covered her laugh with a hand, and looped her arm around his. Yes. I think I am. It was now or never. If Dae Ho didn't agree with her request, there was no doubt that she'd never try to reach for someone's hand again. And so he led her out. The unpolluted, night sky was a sight to behold. One of nature's greatest gifts. The sheer magnitude of its beauty, its creation, and its distance made her concern seem so pathetically unimportant in comparison. Her issues would not make the world stop turning to cater to her needs. Beautiful, isn't it? Eun-ha tilted her head in Dae Ho's direction, just enough to catch a distant look in his eyes. His world-weary voice belied his years. And that struck a chord in her heart. She wondered what made him sound so melancholy. His parents, perhaps? There was an underlying numb acceptance to his tone. She was curious, but refrained from asking. There was no need to poke around old scars. Ironically, they were about to reopen one of hers. Eun-ha was halfway tempted to just turn on her heel and run back home, because if she truly voiced out her emotions, her pain, her fears, it would make it real. It would mean acknowledging the existence of her insecurity, of her failed marriage. But bottling everything up was likewise toxic. And as much as the years of motherhood and housewife duty somehow dulled her independence, there was a spark of defiance within her. She wanted to release everything with a mighty yell. She wanted to feel true freedom once again. And it was exactly that reawakened desire that made her seek Dae Ho out. Eun-ha heaved a deep breath. Dae Ho. And then she released it into the air. He glanced at her. I've never told this to anyone else. He didn't take his eyes off her, and neither did he speak. He was giving her his full attention, a silent stage where she could take her time, and freely speak her mind. It was hard to muster up the courage, but when his calm, composed eyes met hers, she somehow just melted. I? Eun-ha's voice quaked. I'm not happy with Yang-gu. Chapter 12, Secrets. I'm not happy with Yang-gu. A gentle breeze played with Eun-ha's hair as she stared at me. Those soft, purple eyes of hers were so bright and wet that I could almost peer straight into her soul. The confession had left her emotionally drained yet finally free of its burden. And for a moment, I found myself questioning if I was the right person to safeguard the secret. Regardless, she decided to trust me with it. There was nothing I could offer to that statement, so I did what I promised to do. I scooted a little closer to Eun-ha and wrapped an arm around her shoulder. She shifted further into my one-armed embrace and rested her head on my shoulder. Dae Ho. A shuddering sigh followed her next words. What kind of person do you think I am? The way she phrased it was a clear hint that she had been doing some heavy-duty thinking about it, and it was not a simple spur-of-the-moment question. What kind of person is she anyways? She stared back at me. A wave of memories flooded my head. I could pick them apart and analyze each one of them with no side effects whatsoever. And in every memory, Eun-ha had always been there. Sometimes with a smile. Some others with a frown. The most important of them all was the first time I met her. Dae Ho's emotions were particularly strong in that one, to the point that I could feel their thrum in my heart. Eun-ha was the core of this family. The sun. We all depended on her, yet we've never stopped to think just how important she was. She was taken for granted. And the truth was that Dae Ho also had. The realization made me slow down. Auntie. We stopped walking. It was really hard to wrap a bunch of stupid words into a sentence that could genuinely convey what I felt. I was a football player, for God's sake, not an orator. I don't know you intimately enough to make an accurate judgment of your character, but it shows in the little things. In the way you always sacrifice yourself for others. In the way you always get up early in the morning to make the goddamn best food I've ever eaten. In the way you always walk around with this beautiful, yearning sort of smile that makes my day brighter the moment I see you. In the way you're this, centered, grounded figure in my life that I know will always be there, to support and love me. Your selflessness hasn't gone unnoticed. I just wish I could have said this to you sooner. That's the kind of person you are. Eun-ha's eyes widened, her bottom lip caught between her teeth. Her shoulders trembled. My hold on her tightened, as a silent gesture of encouragement. A cocktail of emotion swirled in those purple orbs. Then the tears welled up. My fingers were immediately there, on her cheeks, to catch the bitter pearls before they could stain her skin. Eun-ha sniffed, looking at me under a new light. Dae Ho. The way my name rolled off her tongue was not laced with the familial, tender love I might have expected from her. Instead, there was a strained need in her tone. You. And then she looked away, shaking her head, as if doing so would shake away the thoughts. We quietly resumed walking. I thought that was the end of it, but after a comfortable stretch of silence, she continued. I've always loved Yang-gu. Her voice was so low it might as well have been a whisper. I thought, I'd be happy with him. He was not the most charming, but he was funny, honest, and loyal. Her eyes drooped, an embittered smile on her face. Our wedding day is one of the fondest memories I have, but looking back on it now, I wonder how much of it was built on lies. The tears threatened to spill again, but she reined them in, finding strength in the warmth of my bosom. I wonder how many times he cheated on me. When I found out, I was heartbroken. I was in pieces. I wanted to leave, but by then we already had 2 beautiful daughters. It would not have been fair to them. She sacrificed her happiness for that of her daughters. Still, I couldn't help but wonder. If Mia and Sue knew about this, it would destroy them. If they knew, all of this would have been for naught. Eunha's marriage stood on shaky foundations. Everything was held together by a lie. And the one who was paying the consequences was her. "You're strong," I said, feeling a stab of regret that this woman, who was genuinely kind and sweet, had to go through this. "You're really strong." "Thank you," Eunha said with a small smile. "Dae Ho, don't tell this to anyone else, please. Especially not the girls." Her hold on me strengthened in a silent plea. I nodded against the side of her head. "Don't worry. It's our secret." I smiled. Yet another secret between us. There was no word that could possibly describe how proud I was when I heard her chuckle. If I could bring even a crumb of happiness into this woman's life, then I'd do my best to make sure she would never have to sacrifice herself again. It must have been 1 hour later when we finally got back home. We slipped inside quietly, taking off our footwear as we did so. Eunha's steps were as light as a feather. She turned around, tucking a silky strand of hair behind her ear, and gave me this 1,000-watt smile that almost stopped my heart. "Dae Ho, thank you, really. Don't thank me. I'm glad we had this conversation, Auntie. I promise I'll help you in any way I can. And don't you dare refuse." I narrowed my eyes at her flustered look. "It's the least I can do after all you've done for me." "Ein asmila widanat considerably. Dae Ho, I'm glad you changed. I'm also glad I did," I admitted, sitting down on the couch of the living room. She stood there, motionless, staring at me. "Shouldn't you go to sleep, Auntie? What about you?" She returned, making her way towards me. I looked up at her. "I'm not sleepy." A blush spread across her cheeks. "I'm sorry." She fidgeted. "Why do I feel like she's misunderstanding something?" I tilted my head. "No. Don't apologize. It's not your fault." Eunha sat next to me. "It's because you couldn't finish, right?" "Oh, no, Auntie. It's not because of that. You're saying this to not make me feel bad." Eunha accused with a pout. A very biteable pout. She shuffled closer to me, our knees touching. Despite this extremely forward hint, a shy, rosy tint rushed to her cheeks. "Auntie." I tried to wrestle away, but her hand cradled mine. "I'm not going to take advantage of you. Not when you're like that," I said, somehow not finding the courage to stare at her. "Those eyes can turn any man into a blabbering fool." "You're not taking advantage of me." Eunha breathed out. "Of course, I'm not going to do this for you whenever you want, but it should be fine, just this time. Right?" "Not right at all. What's wrong with her? More importantly, what the fuck is wrong with me?" "Just this once then?" Oh, now I was lying to myself too. We both were, in fact. Just this once. Euna whispered. "She doesn't love Yonggu anymore. He cheated on her. He doesn't deserve her." And then she tucked both feet under her backside. With a coy yet earnest smile, she reached her hands for my pants. "But do I deserve her? This doesn't mean anything. It's just some harmless release between mom and son?" "Ah." Her skilled fingers slipped past the waistband of my pants, and pulled everything down, until my member sprung out, lively and throbbing expectantly. The moment she had even alluded to "help me," all the blood rushed down to my loins. Her hand folded perfectly around my shaft. Her skin was a bit chilly, likely due to the remnants of the outside weather lingering on her palm. I hissed. Eunha looked at me. "Dae Ho." She stroked her hand up. My breath hitched in my throat. And then she brought it down. The feeling of her soft, delicate, and smooth skin on my scalding hot cock made my mind spin round and round, on a carousel of pleasure. I've never felt this before. So many things were weird about this world. This life. Even such a simple contact between Eunha and me. The feeling was amplified. More than anything I've ever experienced in my past life. "Does it feel good, Dae Ho?" she asked, bathing the side of my neck in her hot breath. I barely managed a nod at that question. "Good." And then Eunha slid her face down, next to her hand. She parted her plump lips, tongue immediately sticking out. And with a flick of her wrist, she guided my bulbous, crimson head inside her mouth. The tight, velvety warmth of her oral cavity enclosed my shaft. She sucked me further in, cheeks hollowing out. My hands balled into fists as the electrifying sensation overwhelmed me. "Fuck." Eunha lowered herself until she had half of my cock sheathed in her throat. "This is..." I could hardly think straight. Too lost was I on that slippery tongue of hers. An outpour of drool dripped down my shaft with each bob of her head. I couldn't stay idle like that, however. One of my hands glided down the beautiful concave of her back, before the lace of her panties halted its advance. "Dae Ho." Unha stuttered out. What are you? And then one of my fingers slipped past the fabric, grazing down her moist folds. HNN. Dae Ho no. The pad of my finger moved in a circular motion across her slit. Unha panted, her tongue clinging onto my cock even though she had momentarily stopped blowing me. Her hot breath, like steam, billowed all over my hard member. I looked down at her. She looked up at me, breathing in and out like a dog in heat. Dae Ho. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes hazy and wet. I brought a finger up to my lips. Shoo. And then with the other, I wormed it in the little O of her pussy. Unha melted, her butt cheeks flexing. HNNN. She was tight there. Extremely so. I honestly expected it to be a tad loose due to childbirth, but the muscles down there were firm. I wedged my finger up to its base, curling into a hook for better access. I pumped it in and out, slowly yet steadily. Her reaction was more explosive than I thought. She mewed like a newborn kitten, her tongue swirling sloppily around the crown of my dick. No. Dae Ho, don't do that. Naturally, I did the exact opposite. I continued rutting her with my finger, going as deep as I could in her tight canal. Unha shivered, eyes wide open. She looked absolutely intoxicated. In fact, I thought she was about to stop sucking me and just enjoy the joyride of my finger. However, her expression, despite its drunken flush, pulled into a determined frown. I blinked, surprised by the sudden change. And then I gasped. She had, without hesitation, impaled her tight, little throat with my huge fuckstick. Her tongue went crazy as it swept, brushed, and lapped at the underside of my shaft with reckless abandon. I clenched my teeth, a bubbling tension in my stomach alerting me of the incoming blow-up. And in all of this madness, I didn't know how, or why, no one heard us. My breath came out in short bursts. I slipped my finger out of her drenched hole, and stroked it down, finding the nub of love within its clitoral hood. I rubbed it, lightly. The effect was quite immediate as Unha nearly choked on my meat. Still, she didn't stop. And neither did I. And as the sounds of debauchery rang out, the cries of our concurrent orgasm filled the air. Unha's butt tightened, her thighs quivering powerfully as her love juices spurted out in a long, continuous rivulet of pure ecstasy. Meanwhile, the slit on my cockhead opened up to flood the inside of her mouth in a torrent of jizz. Her red cheeks puffed up, a thin trail of semen flowing down the corners of her lips. That was... I panted, looking at Unha's messy hair splayed all over my thighs. Incredible. Slowly, she pulled out. My semi-hard cock leaned into my stomach, spurting a few more blobs in the aftermath. Dae Ho. Unha looked at me, mouth wide open and tongue furled out. A pool of cum was there, on its tip. She held both hands under her chin, in case the sticky liquid trickled down. Jigo, wash up? I'll clean up, here, she said with a lisp. Chapter 13, Massage. Again? Vous. Mia could hardly get a wink of sleep that night. And by the time the sun made its ascent to the sky, she gave up and decided to lay there, her bare legs bathing in the pouring daylight. She replayed yesterday's events in her mind, rewinding it, pausing it, and wondering, for the umpteenth time, what the fuck was wrong with her. She snuggled her face into the pillow. It's Dae Ho's fault. Mia peeked out of the pillow with a faint blush on her cheeks. Worst of all? She was still horny. Her time spent with Dae Ho reignited the fire of her lust, and now she couldn't go half a day without thinking about how good her stepbrother felt under her. Damn. He's my stepbrother, we can't? I can't. They hadn't done anything worth being guilty of, but the thoughts had been earthed in her head. Day by day, the sprout of love was growing into something that would soon completely conquer her mind. Something had to be done about it, but what? Mia shook her head, shuffled her feet out of the bed, and stood up. Her mother would soon be calling her down for breakfast. And she hoped that a shower would get rid of the dark bags under her eyes, or the fire in her loins. She slipped into her favorite pair of dolphin shorts and a tight top. The moment she set foot in the hallway, the distinctive thumps of footfalls sounded out from the other side. She looked towards the source, only to find the root of her nightly quandaries walking out of the shower. A towel hung around his neck. And besides his shorts, he was completely bare-chested. He's getting shredded. The thought wormed into her mind like a parasite. It was a simple appreciation for a man's aesthetics, there were no complicated feelings involved in her observation. None at all. Mia no ona? Dae Ho stared at her. Good morning. Didn't expect you to be up so early. Mia calmed herself down and fixed her face into her trademark haughty scowl. I wonder whose fault is that? Sarcasm? She narrowed her eyes, silently cursing her heart for skipping a beat when Dae Ho's lips curled into a smirk. She scoffed, rolled her eyes, and crossed her arms. So? She looked away, flipping her hair as she did so. Are you satisfied? Dae Ho blinked. What do you mean? With the massage I gave you. Mia clicked her tongue. Why am I even bringing that up? I'm supposed to forget about this, not relive it. However, the truth was that she was curious to know Dae Ho's thoughts about what happened. It was not a simple massage. Both of them were aware of that. He didn't seem to dislike the way Mia stopped using her hands and started to use something else. Oh, he shrugged. It was acceptable. His smirk widened. Bastard. I didn't know you had it in you. You're quite innovative, he said as he walked past Mia. Then he stopped. A beat of silence followed. Are you attracted to me? The question was like an arrow through her chest. What are you on about? She waved her hair around, eyes looking down at him in a condescending fashion, though it was obviously a cracked facade. You're my little brother. Don't mistake what happened yesterday for some sort of budding romance between us. Perhaps she had been a bit too rude. Is that so? The fact that he didn't seem to particularly care was quite a bitter pill for Mia to swallow, but that was probably for the best. Really. The last thing either of them needed was for some familial, taboo romance to string them together in a life of lies. There were no feelings. It was just a temporary attraction. Attraction, huh? Mia didn't like that word. Not one bit. It meant that she was teetering on the verge of a dangerous gulf, one that could wreck the relationship she had with Dae Ho, but it could also mean something interesting and exciting. There were so many possibilities behind that door. Actually, in the loosest sense of the term, it was not considered incest. They were not blood-related. She didn't think that her mother would truly care about it. Sua wouldn't care even if they were related. Her father, on the other hand, would likely be convinced only after she threatened not to talk to him anymore. What a mess. Mia turned to look at Dae Ho, but he was not there anymore. She continued staring at the spot he was just in for a couple of seconds more, then sighed, and headed to the bathroom. I'm still horny, fuck. Mia stretched a bit as she made her way down for breakfast. And from the looks of it, everyone else was already there. You're late, Mia. Unha chirped from behind the counter. Oh, Mia chuckled with a flustered blush. I'm sorry, I didn't sleep well. She unconsciously sent a half-hearted glare Dae Ho's way, who ignored it. As she did so, she noticed the presence of someone else. Huh, you're awake. Sua barely lifted her head up to look at her sister. Yeah, she said, tone soft and measured. She tucked a chopstickful of food in her mouth, chewed, swallowed, and only then did she continue. I need to go to the library. I see. Naturally, Mia didn't care. She pulled a chair and plopped her butt on it. Her eyes drifted to Dae Ho, who caught her gaze and returned with a small smile. Oh, everyone is here today. Yanggu flashed a big smile as he sat down next to Unha. Without further ado, everyone dug in. It's really delicious, Auntie. Dae Ho said, eyes roving over the woman in question with an appreciative glimmer. Unha, for some reason, didn't meet his eyes. She only offered a soft thank you in reply. Mia seemed to be the only one to notice this odd, out-of-place interaction. On the surface, it looked fine, but her gut feeling told her that there was something more behind it. Especially when she took into account the unnecessary blush that flared across her mother's face. What the heck? However, right before her train of thought could go off track, a pressing need twisted her stomach into a knot. She tucked her hands between her thighs, already feeling a faint heat spreading out from her core. She glanced at Dae Ho, who was eating without a care in the world. I guess he's the only one who can help me with it. A line of sweat traced down her cheek. Humph. It's not like I can ask him myself though. Mia couldn't help but feel dismayed at how things were spiraling out of control. How did it come to this? Mom, I'm leaving now. Sua slipped her heels on, and, without even waiting for a reply, walked out. Mia saw her sister through the window. She had been waiting exactly for this moment. Sua, at last, rounded the corner, and disappeared from sight. Good. She's gone. And Dad is at work. That naturally left only one unwanted person. She peeked out of the wall and stared at her mother. Mom, aren't you going anywhere? Unha was crouched down, sweat glistening all over her body from the physical work. She stared back at her daughter in confusion. Huh? What are you talking about? Oh, Mia slammed her hands on the table and pressed on. Didn't you used to go to yoga class? Come on. Come on. Please. Leave. 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 Unha chuckled good-naturedly. I stopped going a long time ago. Oh. Mia looked away, thinking hard. Her mind twisted and turned. What about the market? Dad is working so hard, you should make him something nice. Nice. Knowing her, she won't turn the idea down. She loves Dad a lot. Really? Unha tapped her chin in thought. It's working. Mia leaned forward, hands balled into fists. She spoke with dripping enthusiasm. Yes, there wasn't any fruit at breakfast. How could you forget? You do have a point. Mia's giddiness grew exponentially at those words. However, but I don't really want to go. If he wants some fruit, I'm sure he'll bring it back. What? It's not working? Besides, Eunha continued, a soft smile lighting up her face. I wanted to ask Dae Ho a few things. You see, I kinda wanted to get back in shape. And I'm sure he'll be able to give me some pointers. I really don't know where to start, haha. What? No. What the actual fuck was going on? But you're already in shape. Mia shot back, grasping at straws. Eunha touched the sides of her curvy hips and pouted in a very uncharacteristic fashion. You think so? I feel like I've gained weight. You have not. Mia gritted her teeth. And Dae Ho is busy right now. He is? Mia nodded furiously, stuttering a bit. Mom, why don't you go buy some fruits for Dae Ho instead? You know, since he's working out and everything. Make him some steak for dinner too. He looks so thin. It's probably not going to work, she lamented internally. A determined glint flashed past Eunha's eyes. You're right. I need to make him something special. I'll be right back. She pulled her kitchen gloves out, grabbed her purse, and marched out of the house as if she was about to head off to war. It worked. Yes. I mean, what the? Mia shook her head free of useless thoughts and hopped around in a victory dance. She hastily made her way to her room, where she tore her clothes off, and appreciated her nude form in the mirror. There was no way Dae Ho was going to resist this. Still, she was not going to walk on him naked. That'd mean she was literally throwing herself at him, and she was definitely not. She was just using her womanly guiles to lure him into throwing himself at her. And since Dae Ho was inexperienced, Mia would take it upon herself to teach him a few things. No strings attached. It'd be all platonic. And she'd also use the opportunity to finally get rid of her constant state of arousal. Win-win. Mia slid on a white, revealing dress. It was a thin piece barely held together by a few stitched points on its side. Her satin-like, milky white thighs were served on a silver platter for Dae Ho's visual pleasure. And that was not even taking into consideration the deep crevice of her cleavage. She was simply irresistible. Now that she was all geared up for the battle ahead, she swung the door open and made a beeline for Dae Ho's room. One step at a time. A blush dusted her cheeks. Her heart beat faster and faster the closer she got to her target. Mia knocked on the door, briefly wondering if she should strike a pose, for a better effect. She didn't have time to come to a conclusion that the door clicked open. Dae Ho must have been working out. His chest was heaving and sweat clung all over his skin. She released a shuddering breath. His muscles were becoming more and more noticeable. Even the baby fat on his face was slimming down. Oh, fuck. Now I think Dae Ho is handsome too. Mia no una. Such an unexpected visit, and such an unexpected get-up. Dae Ho chuckled, eyeing her up and down. He drank in every inch of her exposed skin, making the ball of heat in her stomach flare up even further. There's no one at home, so I thought, you know, we could hang out and stuff. Mia said nervously. When he didn't answer, she immediately crossed her arms and looked away. It was a good thing her hair was long enough to cover half of her face. It was like a protective blanket. I'm working out. Can we hang out later? She gulped as she turned to look at him. You must be sore. A breath escaped her lips. Don't you want a massage? Creator's thoughts. Chapter 14, Massage. Gone right? Chamiapiovu. Mia's heart pounded in her ears. A massage is a good idea. There'll be a lot of body contact between us. Oh, and she was not wearing anything underneath that white, little piece. He'd be under the full assault of her soft curves and smooth flesh. Can't get enough of me? Dae Ho's nonchalant tone stood in contrast to the playful glimmer in his eyes. Maybe? She challenged. God, she hated being flustered. Dae Ho was supposed to be the one blushing and stuttering and wrapping himself around her finger. Not the other way around. He blinked, taken aback. Finally, a reaction. Mia chirdinwadli. We're being a little more honest now, aren't we? TCH. Mia glared at him. Do you want the massage or not? He stared at her, eyes sharp and focused. She couldn't understand why he was stalling. With how observant he was, there was no way he didn't pick her words apart to find the hidden message between the lines. The hint was pretty obvious without either of them playing this weird game. You've been so nice to me, Mia Nuna. Huh? But I've never done anything for you. Dae Ho continued evenly. Then, with the onset of his next words, a smirk developed across his face. Wouldn't it be brotherly of me if, for once, I'm the one releasing the tension off your shoulders? The last part was voiced out in a hot whisper. You. Mia's eyes widened. Yes. He shrugged, as if his words didn't have a massive impact on her. Let me give you a massage. A Dae Ho Appa special. What? Dae Ho scooted a bit to the side and gestured at her to come in. Mia excited. He's messing with me. He knows what I want, and he's doing it on purpose. She fixed her villain smile back on her face. Oh ho. Alright, little bro. Give this Nuna a massage. And then she sashayed inside, her hips swaying in a mesmerizing dance. He closed the door, locking it for good measure. She walked up to his bed, climbed on it, and lowered herself down. Her dress might have accidentally rode up as she did so. She tucked her arms under her face and stared at Dae Ho. Hopefully, there won't be interruptions. You're such a troublemaker. Mia heard him mutter, more to himself than to her. You planned this in advance, didn't you? She blinked at him, owlishly. I don't know what you're talking about. She wiggled her but left and right. Massage? He made his way over before he noticed one tiny detail. You didn't bring the oil with you. Your hands are enough. He sat down next to her, but that seemed to upset her. What are you doing? Straddle me. Mia wiggled her plump, juicy but one more time. Just like I did last time. It's not like you're really going to rub only my shoulders, HM? I demand a body massage. I remember quite vividly that you didn't only give me a massage. Dae Ho rebutted, an undertone of amusement thick in his voice. She smirked. Well, then, feel free to get payback. I won't resist. And I won't tell anyone about it. From the corner of her eyes, she saw his expression stiffen up. She mentally pumped a fist in victory. It felt so good to see him speechless for once. However, her success was short-lived. Dae Ho's face loosened into this dangerous smile that sent a pleasant shiver down her back. If you insist, then I won't hold back, Mia Nuna. She heaved a deep sigh and snuggled further into the cocoon of her arms. Go ahead. Make me feel good, Dae Ho. She challenged. He swept one leg over her hips and lowered himself down on her perky, awaiting butt. It was only normal that their body's natural reactions to certain stimuli made their private parts act up. Mia bit her bottom lip as she clearly felt a hardening appendage poking into the crack of her ass. They were separated only by a thin layer of fabric. She clenched her cheeks and pushed them further into Dae Ho, as a sign that she was liking what was going on. Mia noona? Mia amit. Yes, Dae Ho. He leaned his mouth next to her flushed ear. His breath tingled her lobe. Do you like it gentle, or rough? She gulped, her heart hammering against her ribcage. Dae Ho. She mentally rebuked herself for stuttering. You can be rough? A blush spread across her cheeks, giving her an intoxicated look of pure eagerness. Dae Ho slowly leaned back, his hard member rubbing quite vigorously into the lovely crevice of Mia's wide butt. A faint whimper fled from her mouth. He placed his hands on her shoulders, the pads of his fingers sinking and rubbing, sensually. They danced across her fair, yet flushed, skin. Oh, sis, you're so tense. He pinched her shoulders, but not too hard. His hands glided down. The dress is in the way, isn't it? Mia panted. Want me to take it off, you know, for a better massage? Dae Ho smirked. Yeah, it'd be quite remiss of us to neglect the rest of your skin. You should definitely take it off, you know, for a better massage. She craned her head to look at him. I can't do much in my position. Why don't you take it off for me? He nodded with a theatrical bow. It would be an honor, Mia Nuna. His fingers gently tugged at the laces on the side of the dress. They easily came undone, exposing more skin when the dress loosened. Then he slipped off the straps on her shoulders, allowing her arms to bend and worm their way out. Dae Ho tossed the white dress on the floor, and stared with barely hidden surprise at the velvety smoothness of Mia's skin. The pencil-thin beams of sunlight that peered through his window draped all over her, bestowing an almost otherworldly glow to her back. Especially that beautiful concave that led down to her butt. What are you waiting for? Is this the quality of your service? Mia grinned. Dae Ho ran a hand through his hair. Sorry. Sometimes I forget just how stunning you look. I don't believe in God, but for you, I might make an exception. Mia gritted her teeth. Stupid heart. Stop beating so fast. She sighed, hoping that the sudden intake of oxygen would cool down her boiling skin. In that case, be proud that you get to touch me. She said haughtily. Of course, who else but I would want to touch you anyway? This bastard. Kidding. Kidding. Dae Ho chuckled, his fingers skating down her spine. As a result, her hair reared on its end. Though, you really seem to love the way I touch you. You can lie to yourself as much as you want, but your body is quite honest. Mia mewed quietly. She looked back at him, her eyes bright and wet, and her cheeks a ripe crimson. Dae Ho, go lower. And so his finger slid further down. Lower. The tip of his finger now rested on her tailbone. She didn't break eye contact. Lower. Dae Ho brought his finger all the way down, in a straight line through the enticing crack of cheeks. He stroked the puckered fissure of her bumhole, and finished the curve by skimming it across a moist, pink slit. Mia melted into a husky moan. The sound reverberated through his chest, strumming his heart with its melody. Dae Ho's member was aching to be freed of its restraints and snuggle between his sister's love buns. Dae Ho, she called out, now staring at him with unbidden lust in her eyes. We don't need to play around with this anymore, do we? No. He chuckled. You've made it crystal clear that you came here to perv on your little bro. His finger moved, drawing light circles around Mia's secret entrance. HNN. She cried out. Stop teasing me, Dae Ho. But I'm not teasing you. Dae Ho tilted his head in faux confusion. The tip of his finger wiggled a bit before it probed the inner walls of her tight cunt. She whined, tongue lolling out. Damn, he's good. Each stroke, flick, and swirl of his finger was done in accordance with how loud her moans were. If a particular movement of his hand drew out the most pleasure from her, Dae Ho would concentrate on doing that, over and over and over. He wholly explored her pussy, finding out what made her tick and what did not. What made her shiver and what did not. What made her beg him for more and what did not. Dae Ho, please. He has done this before, but with who? And then he stopped. He pulled his finger out, a trail of wetness following it. With an unhurried flick of his hand, he unbuttoned his pants. Mia watched with bated breath as he tugged everything down. A large pillar of meat bounced out. Her eyes widened. He's so big. She had never thought about Dae Ho's growth in that department before. He was, after all, her goofy little brother. A bundle of cheerfulness and energy, not this sex machine kneeling behind her. Mia nona. His sudden serious expression made her a little sober. This is just some harmless fun, right? There's nothing more to this. For some reason, her heart cracked a little, but the pain was distant in comparison to the pressing need of having that huge lump of man-meat jammed inside her. Oh, of course. She smirked, though it came out a little fake. Were you expecting something more? No. Dae Ho shook his head, widening the crack in her heart. This suits me just fine. With both hands, he spread her cheeks apart, exposing her pink, tight holes in all of their lewd glory. Slowly, he aligned the wide mushroom head of his stick against the entrance of her pussy, rubbing along its crook to lube it up. I'm going in, Mia Nuna. HMHM. Mia grunted her acknowledgement. Dae Ho tucked his flared tip between her folds. He didn't push himself all the way in. It was a slow process, to let their private parts acquaint themselves with each other. He eased his head in first, a schlick sound ringing out. Mia covered her mouth with a hand, eyes crammed shut. Then he lowered his hips even further. Mia's love canal readily absorbed his shaft, inch by inch. She welcomed him into the deepest reaches of her pussy, until her cheeks met his navel. No space separated them anymore. Dae Ho stood there, a bit dazed as the tight warmth of his sister wrapped around him, squeezing, sucking, and pulling him further into her core. Mia had fully embraced the sensations overpowering her. Her mouth was open, tongue sticking out. HNNNN. Ditto. Her ensemble of moans filled the room. Fuck. Dae Ho grunted, pulling back a little, and then rammed it back inside. Pull out. Thrust in. Pull out. Thrust in. The insides of Mia's womanhood stretched and rearranged themselves to fit the huge intruder pounding away. Dae. Oh. Mia called out through the moans. What's this feeling? He rutted his cock in and out of her, his hips slamming powerfully against her cheeks. He was rough, just as she had told him to be earlier. The initial gentleness devolved into this animalistic lovemaking. The sound of skin being smacked rang out. Dae Ho grabbed Mia's thin waist and urged her to lift her butt up. She easily complied. He mounted her butt, and the new angle that he was now thrusting from was quickly pushing them towards that strained peak. The bed creaked, a background melody to their duet. Her moans were a high-pitched vibrato, while his were low, verging on a deep note of pure pleasure. Mia fisted the sheets of his bed as she bit into his pillow. Tears welled up in her eyes. The ecstasy of her little brother's schlong rocked her body. It felt so good that she could hardly believe she had been living with this Adonis for the better part of her life and never tasted this bite of heaven. She panted, face flushed and slicked with sweat. Dae Ho pasted himself all over her, the tempo of his thrusts accelerating. His deep, sex-addicted grunts filled her eardrums. Mia Nona. He breathed out. Dae Ho. Mia mute. His hold on her tightened. I'm about to. Me, too. Her nails sunk into the bedding. A bubbling, focused point of pleasure burst out from her core. The shockwaves rippled through her nerve endings. HNNNN. The blinding discharge made her thighs quake. The juices spewed out on her brother's legs. Each spurt sent an immense jolt of bliss through her. Behind her, Dae Ho's climax came one beat later. Thankfully, he had the consciousness of mind to pull out. His shaft throbbed, and the eruption blew all over Mia's back. Oh! The ropes of cum shot out in fire-quick succession, glazing her golden locks, the curve of her back, and towards the end, her butt too. She was covered in thin trails of white cream. Once they climbed down that peak, Dae Ho lay down next to her, and Mia instinctively draped a hand over his chest. She panted into the crook of his shoulder. The sheets underneath them were soaked with their fluids. Fuck, what have I done? Chapter 15, Internet Sensation. I fell asleep. A couple of hours, it seemed. The sun was still up. The warmth next to me had faded considerably, leaving only the dry remains of a morning of passion. I turned around, halfway expecting to see a mane of gilded threads splayed all over my chest. There was none. At some point, Mia did the right thing and walked away. A pillow talk was not on the agenda. Better this way. It truly felt like a one-night stand. There was no affection, only a primal lust. It was great, really. Except that it was not to some cheap girl looking for a good lay with the famous Jair Campinho. It was not some orchestrated move to elevate her status by fucking a professional football player. Mia was my sister. Well, supposedly. She was not really my sister in the truest sense of the term. Yes, okay, it might have sounded like an excuse to justify my actions. But seriously, I didn't think that what I did was necessarily wrong. But Mia might have. I had a lifetime of experience as a rich man at the peak of his physical form. I've done and seen things in bed that would make your typical fetish porn video look like a child's bedtime cartoon. Anyway, that was not the point. The point was that I could easily draw a line between love and lust. I wouldn't confuse one for the other. Mia had laid the hints bare for me to see and pick up on, and I could glimpse at the knot of emotions she was trying to figure out. I was at the heart of that knot. It was not complicated to understand. The behavior of the recent Mia and the past Mia was so different that her being, potentially, in love with me was not that far-fetched. And then there was Eun-ha. She was a bona fide Asian MILF. Twice had she been on the receiving end of this body's massive blast. She took everything in stride, as if it was not a big deal. Her husband was cheating on her. And she cheated on him with me. Then Mia hopped on the bunny trail, and we all fell deep into the rabbit hole. However, in this household, it seemed as if I was the only one concerned about the recent developments. Whatever. I shook my head and got up, my back was a bit glued to the sheets. I had fallen asleep right on the sticky patches of our lovemaking. A shower. I definitely needed a shower. I crumpled the dirty sheets into a ball and headed to the laundry room to stuff them inside the washing machine. After that, I immediately ran to the bathroom to cleanse my body of Mia's nectar. By the time I was presentable enough to make my presence known, Eun-ha was already busying herself with pots and pans. "Oh, Dae Ho," she chirped as soon as she noticed me. A wide smile graced that beautiful face. "I'm cooking a big steak for you. Oh, and there are a lot of veggies too. It's all fresh and good." "Really?" I didn't know what to say. "Thank you." I smiled back at her. She waved her hand in a "don't worry about it" gesture. "You've been working hard." Mia suggested it to me, actually. "You need to eat a lot more if you want to become big and strong." "I appreciate it, Auntie." I sat down, resting my chin on my hand. "Whatever you cook, it'll certainly be delicious. You have very talented hands." It was not in my intention to make a double entendre, yet I couldn't help but recall the night I spent with Eun-ha. And by the slight blush on her cheeks, she was also reminiscing about our time together. "Haha, thank you. Good move, Auntie." Avoid the topic completely. "No rabitoles anymore." "Where's Mia?" Eun-ha asked, cupping her chin with a gloved hand. I was hoping she could help me peel the onions. I shrugged. "No idea. Maybe in her room?" "I'm here." The hurried sound of footfalls rang out. Mia appeared right around the top corner of the stairs, her peanut brown oversized shirt fluttering in the wake of her stride. Her hair was done differently too, I noticed. Instead of letting all of that mane free, she bundled those flowing locks into a low ponytail. A few stray bangs framed her face. It was exactly the get-up of a woman who had a very satisfying night, or in our case, morning. Naturally, the moment our eyes locked, she hastily averted hers. A rosy dust tinted her cheeks. "Oh, è una sterdati mia. Here you are. Do you need help with anything?" Mia forced out a chuckle, hands clasped behind her back. "Yes. Could you peel these onions for me, honey?" "Yeah, sure." Mia grabbed the bowl and brought it over to the table, where she sat down, and started to skillfully knife the layers off. She was across from me, a foolish choice if she truly wanted to avoid me. "That's a nice shirt you got there. Very cute," I said offhandedly. The bare head in the middle of her chest was quite eye-catching, for various reasons. The blush across her nose deepened a little, and in the midst of her embarrassment, she still managed to glare at me. Thank you. You look like you have a lot on your mind. I continued. The fingers holding the knife trembled, and she ended up cutting a whole onion in half, instead of just the skin. Mia gulped, concentrating a little harder. We shouldn't talk about that, she whispered. At least she didn't blurt everything out. Unha was right behind the counter, perfectly within earshot, even though she was humming to herself. Perhaps. Perhaps not. It didn't really bother me, but it bothered her. And if it bothered her, then it bothered me. But it happened. It was. I lowered my voice. Consensual. We're adults. And this was not your first time, was it? It's different. Mia said. When emotions are involved, everything is different. Well, I'd like to think it was. I'm big, aren't I? I jested, smirk in place. I had to keep things light between us. And I was doing a terrific job so far. She shrunk in her chair, an embarrassed blush on her face. Shut up? She reached one foot out under the table and lightly kicked my shin. Aggressive. I noted. Mia sidni silence. After an unexciting lunch, I halfway expected Mia to coop herself up in her room. As a matter of fact, she did. For about 1 hour. Then all hell was let loose. I was getting dressed to return to the football field nearby. I had to keep the rust off my skills, when the door of my room was almost torn off its hinges. Dae Ho! Mia made her entrance with a mighty yell and a flustered look on her face. Predictably, I was confused, as any man would be, were they in my shoes. Mia noona? She ran up to me, not even bothering to explain. She turned her smartphone around and almost slammed it into my face. You have to watch this. Thank God for quick reflexes. This woman was a menace. I sighed, taking the device off her hands. Mia was instantly by my side, peering over my shoulder with an intensity that, quite honestly, threw me for a loop. I fixed my eyes on the app she had opened. YouTube. A video occupied a good chunk of the screen, and, under it, an exaggerated title. Random Kid Destroys U18 FC Soul Players. A catchy title, no doubt. What was catchier, however, was that when the video started, it was to a very familiar scene. A football field. And a silhouette that blitzed past the enemy line, the ball swirling around him in a way that left everyone stunned. Did you upload this? I asked as I watched myself score continuously. I was aware that Mia had secretly filmed me. No. I would not do something like this without your permission. Mia said with an unnatural strain to her voice. But, that's not what's important. Look here, Dae Ho. She pointed at the numbers underneath the title. 700.000 views. 40.000 likes. 2,800 comments. I tilted my head, amused. Impressive numbers, for sure. But the World Cup alone could net billions of views. Oh, so they were an under-18 team? Scrolling down, the comments started to show up, filtered by the most popular. Holy shit, he destroyed them so bad these guys won't recover, skull_emoji. The dislikes are from Souls players. He's really good, but the U18 isn't exactly known to be a strong team. He'd get his cheeks clapped if he went against the official club. I thumbed from one comment to the other. As always, the viewers' reactions were entertaining to read. Why are you not? I don't know, more surprised about this. Mia clawed at her hair in exasperation. Dae Ho, do you understand what this means? I don't know. It means that I'm hella good? I shrugged. It's just a video, Mia Nuna. Nothing to make such a huge deal about. It'll be popular for a few days, then the hype will slowly fizzle out. Yes, but, Mia Nuna. She looked at me. Do you think we could make money off this? It was not as if I was in desperate need of cash, but I'd rather have it and not need it, than need it and not have it. I don't think so. The channel that uploaded the video doesn't belong to us. Mia sighed. We can't monetize it. We can make our own channel then. I suggested, staring at the name of the channel with particular interest. Tifa Football UWU. Mia's eyes almost popped out. Why, you're kidding, right? I handed the phone back to her. No, why would I? I scratched my chin and thought. Football is not limited only to South Korea, Mia Nuna. This is the kind of content that can get popular worldwide. If done correctly. She still looked a bit hesitant. I don't know, Dae Ho. What if it doesn't work out? Who cares? If it doesn't, then we wouldn't lose anything besides some of our time. If it does work, though. I trailed off, allowing her brain to conjure up the fame and riches she'd get her hands on. I have the skills to make this venture succeed. But I need someone to film me. Perhaps Gobang could help me too. He was tech-savvy enough that he might be able to provide the videos with some basic edits. I'd run the idea by him later. For now, though. Come with me, Mia. We should hurry and get some clips in before it starts to rain. Mia squawked out indignantly as I grabbed her wrist and made a dash for the door.